The morning air in Lancaster felt thin and bright the first Thursday after the funeral, and everything in Marcus's house seemed strange, as if it had been moved half an inch while he was gone and now refused to line up with memory. The green coffee mug his granddaughter Lily had chipped 2 summers back sat steaming on the counter, untouched. The clock in the hallway ticked too loudly, and the mirror by the front door showed a man whose shoulders were set like he was waiting to carry something heavy that no one else could see. He had slept in Evelyn's side of the bed because the sheets there still held the faint smell of lemon soap, and he had come downstairs early to watch the light find the apple tree. But the phone began to vibrate before the sun cleared the neighbor's roof. First, a missed call from Beth, then another, and then a new name on the screen. Derek. He answered and said, "Good morning." But Derek did not. He said clear and quick, like a man who had already practiced his lines. "Start packing. The house is sold." And he let the last word sit there like a heavy box dropped on a floor. Marcus looked out the window at the bare branches and the small clay pot of rosemary on the sill that Evelyn had set there last fall, because she liked the way the kitchen smelled when he brushed against it. And he said, in a voice that sounded like a level placed on a board, "There is no mortgage." He did not mention the second house that Evelyn had arranged in a quiet trust under her maiden name, a white cottage 2 hours east, or the $480,000 she had parked across quiet accounts with names that didn't draw attention, because grief had taught him that not every truth belongs to every room. And he also did not mention the key in the tin box in her study drawer, or the pale blue folder with her square handwriting on a sticky note that said "not yet," because some instructions feel heavier than others and should be lifted only once. Derek sighed into the line, the kind of sigh that tries to be both patient and in charge, and he started talking about taxes and age and uneven steps and how a cash buyer is waiting. And Marcus listened without arguing, making small notes in his head the way he used to when the doctor talked, and Evelyn squeezed his knee under the table to remind him to wait his turn. After a while, he said, "I'll think about it." And he ended the call before Derek could sell him his own life in clean bullet points. The house went quiet again, but it was not the same quiet he had known in the days right after the funeral, when the silence had felt like a heavy coat. It was a pause, like a held breath, before the second sentence of a difficult conversation. He rinsed the coffee he could not drink down the sink and stood there until the drain stopped talking. And then he went to the doorway of Evelyn's study and did not cross it, because stepping over that threshold still felt like telling the room she was not coming back, and he was not ready to teach the room that lesson. Not this morning. The phone buzzed again. Beth this time, and he answered because he still wanted to believe that his daughter would talk to him about something other than square footage. "Dad," she said with that soft, bright tone she used when she had a bad idea wrapped in a soft blanket. "We've been thinking. Our basement is finished, full bath. We can add a little kitchenette. You'll have your own entrance, your own space. It would be perfect." And he could hear the script moving between them, the parts already assigned, even the pauses rehearsed. He looked at the marks on the doorframe where Beth and Lily's heights were penciled, the dates stacked like tidy steps, and he said, "Perfect is a big word for 4 walls below ground." And when she said, "It's safer," he said, "For whom?" And let the question live in her ear for a moment before he added, "I am managing." And he kept his voice even because he had once been a young father who spoke too quickly, and Evelyn had taught him what a pause could do. Beth tried to bring up the buyer and the timing and how we can't wait until something happens. And he thanked her for her concern and said he would think. And then he set the phone face down on the counter because he had decided not to let other people set the clock inside his house. He walked to the closet by the stairs, slid out a stack of flattened boxes, and carried them to the dining room where the afternoons stayed warm even in winter. He had started this part the day after the funeral. In the hour after the last casserole dish went back to its owner and the door stopped opening by itself every 15 minutes, he had begun to pack, not his coats or his shoes or his books, but the things that did not belong to him. The things that had stayed too long, because love is a poor label in a storage room. The high school yearbooks with Beth's name written on the edges. The piano books that stopped at page 12. The essay from 7th grade where she wrote she wanted to be the person who brings things to the table. The varsity jacket Derek left here the year he married Beth and promised to pick up and forgot. The shoebox of baseball cards that were going to pay for something and never did. He had wrapped them carefully into the brown paper that Evelyn kept under the sink and written with a black marker in neat, slow letters. Beth, return. Derek, return. And he had set them by the front door where he would notice them when he tried to change his mind. Now he added 2 more labels and smoothed the tape with the flat of his hand, and he felt a calm in his chest that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with balance. The phone buzzed again, a message this time from Derek. Buyer won't wait. Don't make this hard. And Marcus smiled a private smile because he had been reading the world long enough to know that when a man says, "Don't make this hard," he is speaking to himself. He moved through the house to see what else needed a label, pausing at the framed photo on the hallway table where he and Evelyn stood in front of the apple tree on a late afternoon when the tree had still been small and their shoulders careless. He remembered the way she had smiled at him the night before the funeral and said, "Don't argue with children who are not asking questions," and then had turned to the desk and put a paper into a folder he had not wanted to see. And he remembered the way she had gripped his hand during the long quiet when the pastor's voice had become a low hum, and he had wished for her to be brave so he would not have to. He opened the drawer of the hallway table and took out a yellow pad, drew a line down the middle, and wrote at the top in slow letters what they know and what they don't. And under the first he wrote, "I am sad. I am alone. The house is big." And under the second he wrote, "There is no mortgage. There is a plan. There is a key." And then he added a third small column to the right and titled it, "What I Want Them to Think." And he wrote only, "Almost ready," because he respected the power of a small sentence. He did one more lap of the first floor, the way a man checks a fence before a storm, not from fear, but from habit. Then he stood again at the threshold of Evelyn's study and let his eyes trail across the desk. The pen she had left resting on a yellow legal pad at a clean angle. The corner of a pale blue folder peeking from under a stack of old tax returns. And the edge of a tin box catching a piece of winter light. He did not touch any of it, because you do not open a parachute in the living room to see if it fits. He washed the mug and set it upside down to dry, and when the water stopped, he could hear the house breathing, the way old houses do when they decide to help you. And as noon came and the sun finally found the apple tree, the phone rang one more time, and he let it go to voicemail so he could hear Derek's recorded voice say, "We'll swing by Saturday to finalize." And he wiped his hands on the dish towel and spoke softly into the empty kitchen. Saturday is fine, and he meant it, because when someone tells you to start packing and you have already packed, and the boxes by the front door are not yours, it is easier to keep your promise to yourself. Marcus waited until the light in the dining room moved across the rug and touched the study door before he let himself cross the threshold, because walking into Evelyn's room still felt like saying out loud that she was gone. He stood for a moment and looked at the desk the way she always left it, the pen resting at a clean angle on a yellow legal pad, the corner of a pale blue folder showing under old tax folders, and the tin box catching a slice of winter sun. And then he pulled the chair out, sat down, and placed both hands flat on the wood, the way a man steadies himself before lifting something he cannot drop. The bottom desk drawer stuck the way it always had. He leaned his weight, it gave, and he brought the tin box up and set it in front of him, and when he pushed the lid with his thumb, it opened with a small sound that felt too loud in a quiet house. Inside lay a brass key on a paper band, a smaller envelope with his name, and the pale blue folder with a square yellow sticky note on it in Evelyn's neat block letters. "Marcus, if you are reading this, you need to know what's inside." He breathed out, slid the folder free, and opened it. The first pages were bank statements he did not recognize at first. A credit union in York County, a small online bank with a name that sounded like a weather report, a money market at a place they had never used for day-to-day, and a list of certificates of deposit with maturity dates written by hand in Evelyn's pencil. None of the balances were huge on their own. $18,400 here, $62,000 there, $7,900 in a savings account that had not moved for years. But together, they climbed in steady steps to a number that felt like breath coming back into a body. $480,000. He did not say the number out loud. He ran the edge of his finger under each line, and he could hear Evelyn's voice in his head saying what she always said when numbers behaved. Boring is good. Under the statement sat two deeds. The first was the Lancaster house recorded free and clear 6 years ago. His name alone on that paper. A quiet gift she had made so he would never have to explain this home to anyone who spoke like they owned it. The second deed made him stop and look again because the name at the top was Evelyn's maiden name, tied to a holding trust, and the property description said Cape May County, New Jersey. White clapboard, blue shutters, a narrow side yard described in the survey with neat feet and inches, a small cottage 2 hours east he had never seen because she had never shown him. And at the back of that deed, a one-page instruction from a firm in Cape May with empty signature lines and arrows. On death of grantor, transfer to surviving spouse per attached affidavit. A small sticky in Evelyn's hand clung to the edge of that instruction. Use only if needed. Keep private. He felt his jaw tighten and loosen, not in anger, in respect for the way she had planned a road and then marked the turns. Beneath the deeds lay a photocopy of a small life insurance policy. Not the big policies they had handled together years ago. This one only $25,000 with a single beneficiary written in the box, Lily. And the date on the form told him Evelyn had done it last year when they thought the new pills might hold. He put a hand over the page for a moment and then set it aside. The last item in the folder was a letter dated 18 months earlier in her square. Tidy hand. Marcus, if you found this, it means the calls have already started. They love you when you say yes. I watched Beth and Derek count what is not theirs yet. Don't argue. Don't teach with speeches. Use paper. Use timing. The house is yours. It stays yours. I paid it off to keep you free. The money is to keep you from being handled by other people's fear. The cottage in Cape May is for you to rest and think. The neighbor Rosa has a key. Trust Rosa. She owes me a story you will like, but not today. If you need to disappear for a while so they learn how to speak to you, the instructions are in the back. Your life is not a negotiation. Love, E. He read it twice, folded it once along the crease she had made, and put it back where it had been, because he understood that putting a thing back in its place is sometimes how you keep it. He opened the small envelope with his name and slid out a bank card with his bank's logo and a typed slip with a pin, and under the typed numbers Evelyn had written in pen. You hate allowances. Consider this a dare, not a gift. Build a life, not a delay. He smiled because he could hear her saying it, and something inside his chest that had been all edges since the funeral felt a little less sharp. He took the brass key from the paper band and turned it in his fingers. Its weight steady for its size, and on the paper strip she had written, "Cottage side door." And he pictured a blue shutter he had not yet seen, and a door that would say yes when this key asked. He closed the tin box, locked the study window, and went to the kitchen, pulled the yellow pad from the drawer by the telephone, and remade his list with 3 columns. What they know. I am sad. I am alone. The house is big. What they don't. There is no mortgage. There is $480,000 they do not know. There is a cottage. There is Rosa. There is a lawyer I trust. What I want them to think. Almost ready. Unsure. Slow. He underlined slow because he knew Derek tried to win with speed, and speed is easy to trip. He called the only lawyer whose pen never shook around other people's volume, Harold Cho, and said, I need letters that make quiet protect me. Notice that no one represents me, a cease and desist to any broker attached to my address, and instructions to transfer a small property to my name without noise. And Harold said, 1 o'clock, bring whatever she left you, and tapped his pen twice, which is how Marcus knew the man was already making the list in his head. Before lunch, he drove to the post office on Chestnut, rented a P.O. box, asked for 2 keys, and wrote the number in small, neat digits on the back of his own house key label. The woman behind the counter slid the form to him without comment, and he thanked her, the way he thanked people who do things that look small and are not. He went next to the hardware store and bought a new deadbolt for the front door, and 3 fresh smoke detector batteries and a small fireproof pouch for papers, because he believed in making the future do the simple things first. At 1, he sat at Harold's tobacco-colored table and laid the blue folder and the tin box between them. And Harold read quickly but not carelessly, whistled when he saw the Cape May deed, nodded when he saw the Lancaster recordation, and underlined with his pen when he read Evelyn's line, "Your life is not a negotiation." By 2, Harold had drafted a notice of non-representation. "No one is authorized to act for me in the sale of my real property." A cease and desist to Hawthorne Realty by name, and a simple letter for the county recorder stating the property was unlisted, not for sale, and any claim to the contrary was false. "We also freeze your credit," Harold said, "and set alerts. If they go near a conservatorship, we answer with dates, taxes paid, work completed. Judges like numbers." Marcus nodded and signed where the arrows pointed and kept the certified mail receipts in the fireproof pouch. On the way home, he stopped at the post office again to drop Harold's letters and to stand still for a full minute in the parking lot, because sometimes you have to let your body feel the shape of a new plan or it will not believe you. Back at the house, he changed the deadbolt, oiled the hinges, replaced the batteries, and then returned to the dining room and pulled the flattened boxes he had stacked by the sideboard and began to pack the things that did not belong to him. Because if Saturday was going to be a finalized day for Derek, it would be one in which someone saw what return looks like. He wrapped Beth's piano books and wrote, "Beth, piano books, return," in careful letters, and slipped under the tape the 7th grade essay where she had written that she wanted to be the person who brings things to the table. And he packed Derek's varsity jacket, the yearbooks, the shoebox of cards, and he put small, calm notes on top of each stack. "I am returning what belongs to you. I am keeping what belongs to me. The difference is not up for debate." As the light went down, the rosemary on the sill brushed his sleeve when he closed the curtains, and in that small, clean smell, he heard Evelyn again. Use paper. Use timing. And he looked at the clock and at the boxes by the door, and at the tin box on the study desk, and the mystery that still sat in the words, "Trust Rosa. She owes me a story," felt less like a secret and more like a door he would open when the hour was right. He ate toast, turned off the 2 lamps she always left on at night, and went to bed early with the brass key on the nightstand where his wedding ring had rested on the day they took it off for the first operation. And he slept, because he had a list and a plan, and Saturday was coming, and the phone would ring again, and he would answer in his own house, on his own time. Friday came in clear and cold, the kind of Pennsylvania morning that makes coffee feel like medicine. And Marcus was up before the sun brushed the barns on the far road. He made a pot he barely tasted, wrote the date at the top of the yellow pad, and read his columns again. What they know, what they don't, what I want them to think. Then underlined slow once more, because he knew Derek tried to win by going fast. He moved through the house in a steady loop, not rushing, checking locks, checking batteries in the smoke alarms, opening and closing the front door twice so the new deadbolt would learn its work. And by 8 o'clock, he had 3 neat stacks by the door with labels in his careful hand. Beth, piano books, return. Derek, jacket and cards, return. Beth, yearbooks and essay, return. He slid a small note under the tape on each lid, the same sentence in his quiet print. I am returning what belongs to you. I am keeping what belongs to me. The difference is not up for debate. The phone lit with an unknown number at 8:17, and he let it ring twice before he answered. Mr. Heller? Greg with Hawthorne Realty, the voice said, polite like a man reading a script. We're just confirming the Saturday walkthrough for your buyer at 10. And Marcus said, in even words, I have not listed my home, and I have not authorized you or anyone to act for me. Any future contact must be in writing to my attorney. And he set the phone on the counter on speaker and pressed the small red dot on the voice memo app because he had learned late in life that you always wish you had a record. The realtor tried to sound friendly. Of course, no need to make this unpleasant, your family indicated. And Marcus cut in gently. My family indicated many things. None of them bind me. Send letters to Mr. Cho. And he ended the call, then emailed the recording to Harold with the subject line, Realtor Call, Log. He rinsed his mug, wiped the counter, and stood at the window until the light reached the apple tree and made the frost shine like a warning. At 9, he drove to the Chestnut Street post office and stood in line with 2 envelopes under his arm. The certified letters Harold had prepared yesterday. Handed them over, watched the clerk fix the barcodes in place like small shields, and wrote the tracking numbers on the back of his house key tag so he would not be hunting for slips of paper later when the phone rang again. On the way home, he stopped at the bank and moved a small amount from the joint grocery account to the card Evelyn had labeled in her note as a dare. Not much, just enough to make him feel like he was doing the next right thing without making the numbers dance. The teller asked if he wanted a printed balance, and he said no, because paper can tell on you if you leave it in the wrong drawer. At the last minute, he turned into St. Luke's Cemetery because some conversations only behave there, parked by the low stone wall, and walked to Evelyn's marker where the grass still lay rough from the winter thaw. They called, he said to the air. He says there's a buyer. And the wind didn't answer, but the noise from Route 30 dropped for a moment, and he took it as permission to keep going. I won't argue. I'll use paper. I'll use timing. And then he stood without moving and let the cold travel up his legs the way honest work does. Back at the house around 11, he looked up Local Movers Lancaster and chose a company that answered their phone like they were proud to have one, Pine Street Moving. A man named Richie took the call, voice steady, no sales pitch, and Marcus said exactly what he needed. 3 labeled boxes to 2 addresses. Deliver Saturday at 7 sharp. Leave at the door. Get a signature if they offer one. If they refuse, take a photo with the time on it. And Richie said, got it, and repeated the addresses back without mistakes, which mattered. Before he hung up, Marcus added, tell them the sender is Marcus Heller. And Richie said, yes, sir, in a way that made sir feel like service, not flattery. At noon, the study drew him like a magnet, and he let it, stepped over the line, opened the tin box again, took the brass key in his hand, and held it until its warmth matched his skin. He slid the Cape May instructions out and read the page with the arrows twice more, then took the smaller card with the neighbor's name and number, Rosa, written in Evelyn's tidy block letters, and dialed. The voice that answered carried tide and laughter in it, even when it said hello. Rosa, he said. My name is Marcus. I'm Evelyn's husband. And she made a soft sound that felt like a hand on an arm. Ah, Senor Marcus, your Evelyn told me to expect this call when the house needed air. The side door sticks in damp weather. Push with your hip, not your shoulder. I have the spare keys and fresh sheets. When are you coming? He said, soon, because soon was the only honest word that did not volunteer his plan. And she said, I owe your wife a story. She told me I could keep it until her husband was ready to hear it. You let me know when you are ready. And he said, I will. And thanked her, and when he hung up, he stood very still in the study and let the mystery sit where it was. Not a threat, a promise. He ate a sandwich over the sink because plates felt like too much work for bread and mustard, then sat at the table and wrote 2 short notes for Saturday, one for Beth, one for Derek, plain as a fence post. I am not selling my home. If you have something to talk about that is not square footage, I will listen. He tucked Beth's note under the tape flap of her piano box and slid Derek's note into the collar of his old leather jacket, rolled tight in paper. At 2:03, the phone buzzed with a text from Beth. We'll be there at 10 with Greg to finalize. And instead of answering, Marcus called Harold and said they intend to arrive at 10 with the realtor. And Harold said, I'll be there at 9:55. If they bring counsel, good. If not, we keep it short. And Marcus said, short is the plan. And they hung up without extra words, because men who have built something together know when to leave a sentence alone. The afternoon settled slow. He checked the furnace filter, wiped down the kitchen table with the lemon oil cloth Evelyn kept for the good wood, and set the 3 boxes by the door where they would not be forgotten in the morning rush. At 4, the unknown number again. Derek this time, voice thin with effort. "Look, Marcus, don't make this ugly. We have a buyer lined up who is doing us a favor. Cash, fast close. It solves problems you don't even see yet." And Marcus said, if the buyer is real, he can read a letter. And when Derek tried the word conservatorship, rolling it out like a test, Marcus said evenly, "That is a serious word. If you intend to file anything like that, file it. We will respond with dates, taxes paid, repairs done, and you will learn the difference between concern and control." And there was a silence that told him Derek had not expected the sentence to land so calmly. "We'll see you at 10, Derek said tightly, and hung up with a breath through his nose. Marcus set the phone down and smiled without showing it to anyone. Then wrote one more line at the bottom of his pad. "Saturday. Breathe first." Because breathing is cheap and makes all the other things possible. He slept in a clean shirt with the brass key on the nightstand and woke at 5:42 to the soft electric click of the heat and the sound of the east wall settling. He drank 1 full mug of coffee this time, ate toast, put the envelope of certified mail receipts in the fireproof pouch, slid Harold's business card into his wallet where his fishing license used to live, and at 6:50 turned on the porch light. At 6:59, the Pine Street truck eased to the curb with its engine low and its men in wool caps. Richie hopped down and shook his hand like they had worked together before. 3 boxes, 2 stops, he said, reading from the slip, and Marcus nodded and watched them carry the boxes with the care you give a piano. Not because they were heavy, because they were loaded. "Photos, if they won't sign," Marcus said, and Richie tapped his chest pocket where his phone made a square. At 7:12, Marcus's phone buzzed with the first photo. Beth's porch, the box labeled Beth, piano books on the mat, timestamp at the top. At 7:18, the second. Derek's steps, his jacket box, and the cards box stacked with the note visible through the tape. No caption, just proof, which is better than argument. He forwarded both to his P.O. Box email for habit and to Harold for company. Then he wiped the place where the boxes had sat, the faint rub of cardboard on wood gone with 2 passes of the cloth, and he stood in the quiet house and felt it breathe with him. At 9:30, he put on a good sweater and the coat Evelyn liked, because it made him look like a man who took care of his things. Set 2 heavy mugs on the counter for guests who might not deserve them, but would get them anyway, and placed the yellow pad and a pen on the kitchen table with the 3 lines written clean. 1, I am not selling my home. 2, I do not move into basements. 3, if you want to talk about pie on Sundays, I will be here at 2. And when Harold's car turned into the drive at 9:55 and the black SUV with the polished hood followed at 9:58, Marcus felt no hurry in his body. He had already packed, and the boxes that left this house were not his. Marcus opened the door wide at 9:55 when Harold's gray sedan rolled up, and he felt his shoulders settle the way they used to when Evelyn would take the heavy grocery bag without being asked. Harold stepped in with his leather portfolio and a quiet nod, set a legal pad on the kitchen table, and said in his even voice, "We keep it short. You answer only what is asked. I'll handle the rest." Marcus poured coffee into the 2 heavy green mugs and set them on the counter because hospitality was not the same as surrender. They stood a minute in the warm kitchen, the rosemary on the sill giving off its clean smell when the heat kicked on, and Harold ran through the plan in simple lines. Show the notice of non-representation, show the cease and desist, state once that the house is unlisted and not for sale, and end the meeting if anyone raises their voice. At 9:58, the black SUV turned into the drive, the hood polished enough to throw back the thin winter sun like a mirror that liked itself too much. Marcus opened the door before they could knock. Beth came in first, coat open, phone in her hand. Derek followed with his jaw set like a man carrying a grudge under his tongue. Behind them, the realtor Greg, in a navy coat and a smile that was supposed to make paperwork feel like friendship. "Morning," Marcus said. "We'll sit in the kitchen." He did not offer the living room. People make better choices at a table that knows their elbows. Harold stood, extended his hand, and introduced himself. I'm Mr. Cho, counsel for Mr. Heller. Greg blinked like he had been told this would be easier and said, Great, well, we've got a letter of intent and a cash buyer who can move quickly, so if we can just do a quick walkthrough? Harold laid the first document on the table, his finger on the heading. Notice of non-representation. No one is authorized to act for Mr. Heller in the sale of this property. All future contact in writing to my office. He placed the second on top. Cease and desist to Hawthorne Realty by name. Any further solicitation is tortious interference. You will be named. Greg tried to keep his smile from slipping. No one wants to be adversarial, he said, which is what people say when they already started the fight. Derek pulled a folded paper from his coat and slid it across the table, pushing it hard enough that it bent against Harold's hand. This is a good number, Derek said. You're being stubborn to prove a point. Marcus did not touch the paper. He kept his hands flat on the wood the way he had learned to do when he wanted to keep a day from going off the rails. There is no listing, he said calmly. There will be no sale. Beth leaned in, tried the soft approach. Dad, think about the stairs, the yard in winter, the furnace. Our basement is finished. Full bath. We can add a kitchenette. You'll have your own space, your own entrance. Basements are for boxes, Marcus said, not unkind. Not for the rest of my life. Greg cleared his throat and tried the next path. We can discuss a leaseback for 30 days to give you a gentle transition. Keys at close, you keep possession for. Harold tapped the county recorder letter. There is no close. He slid over the certified mail receipts like small shields. These were delivered yesterday. Derek's mouth tightened. We can't keep waiting for something to happen to you, he said, making the word you sound like a problem he was tired of solving. Then stop waiting, Marcus said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He turned the yellow pad he had set out so they could all read the 3 lines written in neat block letters. 1. I am not selling my home. 2. I do not move into basements. 3. If you want to talk about pie on Sundays, I will be here at 2. Beth's eyes flicked to the pad and then to his face, as if she had expected a different kind of father to show up today. Her phone buzzed on the table, screen lighting with a photo from early that morning. The box on her porch labeled Beth, piano books, return. She looked at it and then at him. Did you send my music? I returned what belongs to you, Marcus said. I'm keeping what belongs to me. Derek's phone buzzed too. He swiped, looked down, and his ears flushed. The picture from his steps showed the jacket box and the cards box stacked like a verdict you could not talk over. Petty, he said. Accurate, Marcus said. Greg tried to steer them back into his lane. Mr. Heller, we have a ready buyer. This is a strong offer. Taxes are going up. Maintenance is unpredictable at your stage of life. Harold's pen clicked once, the only sharp sound in the room. Taxes are paid, utilities current, repairs documented, he said. If your buyer exists, he can read. Send any further comments to counsel. Derek leaned forward, palms flat, the old teenage posture he used at 20 when he wanted to look like a man. You're not thinking clearly, he said. You forget things. You already admitted you can't keep up with the yard. If we have to go the conservatorship route. Harold's hand lifted an inch, a stop sign drawn with 2 fingers. That is a serious threat, he said evenly. Any such petition will be answered with evidence of competency, financial records, and documented attempts to coerce. I suggest you choose your next sentence with care. Derek looked at Beth as if law might back him up when his words could not. Beth stared at the steam rising from the coffee she had not touched. We are worried, she said finally, but the sentence sounded smaller than she meant it to. Marcus nodded once, because worry, by itself, is not a crime. You are worried about what you counted before it belonged to you, he said. I am worried about the rosemary in the spring and whether the roof needs a small patch over the east bedroom. We will each manage our own worry. He stood then, not to loom, just to mark the end of the part where people pretend the meeting is still open. Anything more about a sale goes through Mr. Cho, he said. If you want to talk about Lily's school, or the apple tree, or pie next month, my phone still takes those calls. Greg gathered his papers like a man putting cards back in the wrong deck. We'll be in touch, he said, which is what people say when they have run out of ways to get what they came for. Harold walked them to the door without ceremony. Derek paused at the threshold and tried one more angle, softer this time, the way a man taps a door he's already pushed. "We're your family," he said. Marcus looked at him the way a carpenter looks at a level, to see if it lies. "Then act like it," he said, and closed the door gently. The house exhaled in the quiet that follows effort. Harold returned to the table, capped his pen, and slid the extra copies of the letters into a manila envelope. "They'll test the edges for a bit," he said. "Let them. If the realtor calls again, send it to me. Freeze stays on your credit. If a petition appears, I'll call you before lunch." Marcus nodded. They did not shake hands. The envelope was enough. When Harold's car turned out of the drive, Marcus washed the two untouched mugs and put them back in their places, because returning things to where they belong is how you tell a house you mean to stay. He wiped the table with the lemon oil cloth, and the wood looked less tired. He wrote a new line at the bottom of the pad. "Today, done," and drew a small box next to it and checked it. In the study, he opened the tin box, touched the brass key once to feel its weight, and set it back. He did not take the Cape May instructions out. Not yet. He called the post office box line and heard the recorded voice say there was a package to collect, which meant Harold's certified receipts had already started to come home. He put on his coat and walked the yard once, slow, boots finding the soft spots he had known since the kids were small. The apple tree stood bare and honest, its bark rough where a ladder had rubbed during the summer harvest, the rosemary in its pot leaning toward the glass, as if it too wanted Saturday to be over. Back inside, the phone buzzed with a text from Beth. "Can I come by tomorrow with Lily?" He typed and erased, then typed again. "Yes, Sunday at 2. We will have pie. We will not talk about the house." He sent it and put the phone face down. In the quiet that followed, he could hear the old clock in the study keep time without apology. He set the manila envelope from Harold in the fireproof pouch, slid it into the bottom drawer of his desk, and closed the drawer until the latch clicked the way it should. Then he took a lemon from the bowl, rolled it under his palm until the skin gave off that clean scent Evelyn liked, and said out loud to no one and to her, "We are fine." Because now the day had chosen its side, and he had too. Sunday came soft and bright, the kind of Lancaster morning that makes a house feel honest, and Marcus moved through it on purpose. He rolled 2 lemons under his palm, the way Evelyn had taught him to wake the juice, set butter to soften on the counter, and pulled her stained recipe card from the tin. "Lemon pie, bake until the middle says yes." Simple words that always made him smile. He measured, whisked, poured, and while the crust browned, he wiped the table with the lemon oil cloth and put 3 plates out because Beth had texted, "Just us, Derek is busy." And he had replied, 2 o'clock, pie, no house talk, and nothing else. He carried the pie to the windowsill to cool, the rosemary brushing his sleeve and giving off that clean kitchen smell. Then went to the post office to check the box because the recorded voice yesterday said there was a package. A yellow slip waited, clerk window 3, and he signed for a flat envelope heavy with the Cape May firm's stamps and the county recorder's green return cards from Harold. Back home, he set the envelope in the fireproof pouch without opening it yet because timing mattered, then wrote 1 line at the bottom of the yellow pad. "Today, listen first." And under it, in smaller print, "No house talk," and drew a square beside both so he could check them when the hour was done. At 1:53, the tires on gravel told him Beth's sedan was here. He opened the door before they could knock. Lily came in first, hair in a quick ponytail, cheeks red from the cold, and she hugged him the way children do when they mean to keep you from tipping over. "Hi, Grandpa," she said into his sweater, and he felt something in his chest loosen that had been tight for too long. Beth followed, a small bouquet in her hand, grocery store tulips but still flowers, and a look that said she didn't know which script to use. "Smells like Sunday," she tried, and he nodded and sent Lily to wash up because pie tastes better when hands are clean. They sat at the kitchen table, plates and forks ready, steam from the coffee lifting slow, and for a while they did what he had asked. No house talk, only school and the spring musical and Lily's chem class, and how the apple tree looked like it might try this year. "You still have my height marks," Lily said, eyes on the doorframe. And Marcus stood with her and laid the blunt end of the pencil on her head and drew a careful line and wrote the date and her name. Letters neat. "I like knowing where we are," he said, and she nodded, not as a child, as a person who understood keeping. Beth watched, quiet, and when they sat again, she blew on her coffee and said, "I got a box yesterday," and looked at him like she wanted him to be either proud or ashamed so she could choose a lane. "Music books," he said, "and your essay from 7th grade," and he saw it land. Memory finding its chair. She half smiled because he had kept it. "I wrote that I wanted to be the person who brings things to the table," she said, and he cut the pie and slid the first slice to her and said, "Then start by carrying your own." And he said it gently, not as a weapon. Lily grinned like she understood that sentences can be tools if you use them to build. They ate, and the pie set right in the center, the way it should when you don't hurry it. And after a few minutes, Lily asked the question children are allowed to ask when adults forget how. "Are you okay here, Grandpa?" And he looked at her and told the truth. "I am better when people let me be." And then he turned to Beth because the listening part had to go both ways. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Where you are?" And she looked down at her plate and said, "I'm trying." And it didn't sound like a performance. A small silence sat with them, not the bad kind. And then Lily said, "Mom was mad about the box until she saw the essay." And Beth added, "I wasn't mad at the books. I was mad at the mirror." And Marcus nodded, because it is hard to see yourself when the glass tells the truth. The house phone rang once and stopped, a wrong number or a realtor who didn't understand letters, and he let it be. After pie, he walked Lily to the study door and said, "This is your grandmother's room." And for the first time since the funeral, he let someone besides himself cross the threshold. Lily stood at the desk and touched the edge of the yellow legal pad, respectful like a library, and Marcus took the pale blue folder from the drawer and held it in his hands without opening it. "Your grandmother was very good at paper," he said, "and at timing." And Lily nodded even though she didn't know yet. He did not show her the numbers, not today. But he took the small photocopy of the $25,000 policy naming her and put it under the folder so he could feel its weight without letting it take over the room. "Grandma always said boring is good," Lily said, and he smiled because that line had found the next mouth to live in. Back in the kitchen, he cut a second set of slices to take, wrapped them in foil, and put them in a paper bag with the words, "Pie is for Sundays," written on the side because some sentences teach better when they travel. Beth reached for the bag and then set it back down like she was remembering how to ask before you take. "Dad," she said, "Derek started all of this fast. I let him. I thought I was helping. I wasn't." And Marcus kept his voice even. "You can practice," he said, "like piano." And she laughed a small, honest laugh because the piano books had returned to her porch to make that line true. Lily looked between them and said, "Can I come on Wednesdays after school to help with the garden?" And Marcus said, "Yes," too quickly, then slower. "Yes," because he wanted the yes to hold. Beth stood to put on her coat and said, "We'll go." And then stopped at the door. "I am sorry for the way it went." And he nodded and said, "I accept the work." Because forgiveness is a word that means little until someone does something about it. When the door closed and their car sound faded, Marcus checked the 2 boxes on his pad. Listen first, no house talk, and drew a third one. Choose next step, and he opened the fireproof pouch, slid out the Cape May envelope, and read the contents standing at the counter like a man who did not want to give the paper too much theater. The letter from the Cape May firm confirmed the deed would pass to him on affidavit and included a simple form with arrows and a courier instruction, and a short note in a hand that was not Evelyn's. "Rosa will meet you. Side door sticks when it rains. Push with your hip." He smiled because that made 2 women in his life who understood doors. He placed the affidavit with Harold's green cards and wrote on the pad, "Monday, call Rosa. Tuesday, drive early." Then crossed out Tuesday and wrote Thursday because he had promised Lily Wednesdays in the garden, and he meant to show her that keeping is not a speech. He walked next door to Joyce's porch and left an envelope with 2 house keys and a note that said, "Mail in Basil if I'm out. Pie on Sunday when I'm back." Because neighbors deserve sentences that taste like trust. Back inside, his phone buzzed with a message from Derek that said, "Only, we're not done." And he let it sit unread and heavy, because some messages teach better when they hear their own echo. He took the brass key from the tin box and set it on the table beside the lemon bowl and the yellow pad so that old and new could see each other, then made a small supper and washed his plate and put it back where it lived. After dark, he stepped into the yard and listened to the quiet move around the apple tree, and thought about Cape May Air and Rose's story and Evelyn's square letters on the sticky note that had started this part of the map. He did not feel brave, and he did not feel hard. He felt steady, which is what you get when you stop letting other people set your clock. Before bed, he wrote 2 short letters in his slow hand, one to Harold. "Please proceed with affidavit. All future contact to P.O. Box only. Thank you for keeping the paper straight." And one to Lily that he did not seal. "There is something of your grandmother's for you. When you are ready, we will open it together. Bring your gloves Wednesday." And he set her letter under the bowl of lemons like ballast. The last thing he did was turn the brass key in his fingers until it warmed, and set it back in the tin, and say into the dark kitchen what he had said to himself since the morning. The phone first told him to start packing. "I already have." And he let that be enough work for one day. Monday started gray and simple, the kind of Lancaster morning that helps a man keep his feet on the ground. And Marcus moved through it one task at a time. He checked the porch first out of habit, found nothing there but the welcome mat Evelyn had chosen with a small blue stripe, then drove to the post office and turned the brass key in his new box. A yellow slip waited for him. Clerk window 3, and when he signed, the clerk slid across 2 certified green cards from Harold and a flat envelope from the Cape May firm, heavier than it looked. Marcus thanked her, went home, set the envelope in the fireproof pouch without opening it yet, and wrote on his yellow pad in neat letters, "Today, sign, post, breathe." At 9, he called Harold and said, "I have the cards." And Harold said, "Come in at 11. We'll notarize the Cape May affidavit and print an extra notice for your door." And Marcus said 11 is fine, and made himself eat toast so the coffee would not feel alone. At 11, he sat at Harold's tobacco-colored table again, handed over the envelope, and watched the man move through the pages quickly, but not careless, marking the arrow lines with his pen, sliding the affidavit toward Marcus with the notary stamp ready. Marcus signed his full name the way Evelyn liked it, slow but straight, then signed the caretaker authorization for a temporary period until owner present, because the form had a polite box for that exact idea. And Harold slid copies into a thick manila envelope with a clip and said, "This goes in your pouch, this copy in your glove box, this stamped original I'll courier back today." And Marcus nodded, because he respected a man who understood paper could be used to make people behave. Before Marcus left, Harold printed a 1-page notice in big simple letters. No showings, no listing, all contact in writing to counsel, and put it in a clear sleeve. On the inside of the glass, Harold said, so no one rips it off easily. And they left it at that. By noon, Marcus was back home, sliding the sleeve onto the inside of the storm door. The house felt taller when he stepped back into the kitchen, like it appreciated a sentence that kept it from being handled by strangers. At 12:28, a dark sedan pulled to the curb, and the realtor Greg walked up the path with a man in a wool cap who had the slow look of a buyer. And before they could knock, Marcus opened the heavy door only as far as the chain allowed and said, "Calm. Read the sign." And Greg smiled the way people do when they pretend not to see. "We're in the neighborhood, thought we'd do a quick peek." And Marcus pressed the red dot on the recorder app with his thumb where they could not see and said, "No." And when Greg tried to wedge the toe of his shoe against the frame, the buyer pulled him back with a small cough, like a man who did not want his photo on a court paper. "Send letters," Marcus said, and closed the door gently so the chain would land with a small sound that meant finished. He sent the audio file to Harold with the subject line, "Front Step," and the timestamp, and then stood for a minute by the sink with his hands on the cool edge, letting his body catch up with his plan. The rest of Monday he kept it simple. He checked the furnace filter, folded 2 clean shirts into a small suitcase, tucked the fireproof pouch under the folded shirts, and then, because he trusted copies, he placed 1 photocopy of the Cape May affidavit in a plain manila envelope and slid it under the liner of the trunk near the spare tire where no one looks unless they are already tired. Around 5, Beth texted, "Lily is excited for Wednesday," and he typed back, "Bring gloves, pie at 4, no house talk." And Beth sent back only, "Okay," which was the right size word for that hour. At 6, Derek called, voice tight, "Greg says you're being difficult," and Marcus said, "I'm being clear." And when Derek tried the word petition again, Marcus said, "File it or stop saying it." And then he let the silence do the work until Derek hung up with a noise that sounded like a drawer slammed in a kitchen that did not belong to him. Tuesday, he woke to a cleaner kind of light and started with the list. Call Rosa, check tires, hold mail, and he did them in that order. Rosa answered on the second ring with tide in her tone. Senhor Marcus, I made the bed with new sheets. The side door still sticks if it rains. Push with your hip. I will leave the porch light on Thursday and a loaf from the bakery. Not too sweet. And he said, I will come Thursday, and heard himself say it like a man who had decided finally without wanting applause. He went to the post office counter and filled a short yellow form to hold his house mail for 5 days, because he did not need his porch to talk while he was gone. Then drove to the small mechanic on Walnut to put air in the tires and asked the man to check the spare because he believed in not learning the hard way on a shoulder. Back home, he packed slowly, the way you do when nothing you own is in a hurry. 2 shirts, 1 sweater, socks that know your feet, the brass key, the manila envelope with copies, the yellow pad, a pen that writes even when turned upside down, and the small photo of Evelyn at the apple tree that fits in a wallet but looks better on a bedside table. After lunch, the doorbell rang again, quicker this time, the sharp knock of a person who thinks speed is permission, and through the peephole, he saw Derek with a man in a tan suit whose briefcase looked newer than his shoes. Marcus opened the door to the chain and listened. The man introduced himself as Jeff, using the soft tone of people who are paid to bring storms indoors, and said he represented family interests and wanted to check on Marcus's well-being. And Marcus said, my well-being does not meet on my porch. And then, because he did not like men who did not read, he pointed to the sign on the glass, and Jeff nodded like a man trying a key on the wrong door. And Derek said too loud, we only want what's best. And Marcus said, you want what is easy. And he closed the door and sent Harold a message with 2 words, they came, and a time. The evening was quiet then, quiet in the good way, and he used it to put the spare keys in an envelope marked Joyce, Mail and Basil, and slid it under his neighbor's mat with a short note. Back Sunday, pie at 4 if you're free, because he believed in giving small jobs to people who treat them like respect. Wednesday arrived with a thin sun and the sound of school buses, and at 3:15, Lily came up the path in her coat with her gloves in her pocket, and her hair pulled back like she was ready to work. They started in the garden because work with your hands keeps words from running away, pruning the rosemary, clearing the pale winter leaves from the stone path, and he showed her how to fix the shed hinge with a driver that fit the screws, and she caught it fast the way young people do when you let them try. Grandpa, she said finally, are we going somewhere? And he took the brass key from his pocket and placed it in her palm for a second so she could feel its weight, and then took it back and said, yes, we are. But first, you learn which plants forgive bad cuts. And she smiled like a person who can wait when the door is clearly there. After the garden, they washed up in the kitchen, rolled a lemon under their palms until the air agreed to be part of the room, and ate pie from Sunday because some food improves by staying. Beth arrived close to 4, stood at the door like someone who wanted to be invited twice, and Marcus said, come in, no house talk, and she nodded and managed it. Later, when Lily went to the living room to find the old puzzle with the apple orchard picture, Beth said, not rehearsed, I am trying to be better at not rushing, and Marcus said, keep practicing. And she did not roll her eyes the way she used to when she thought practice was something only children were asked to do. By 6, the light was gone, and the kitchen felt like it belonged to them again. They said goodnight on the porch, and Marcus watched the two of them walk down the path and felt the kind of weight that does not crush you, but keeps you from floating away. Inside, he wiped the table with the lemon oil cloth, put the last pieces of pie in foil for tomorrow's road, and set the small suitcase by the door with the fireproof pouch under the shirts and the manila envelope tucked in the side pocket. He turned his phone to Do Not Disturb, except for Harold and Beth. He set the house alarm even though he almost never used it, and he walked one last slow loop. Stove off, windows latched, furnace steady, sign on glass, keys for Joyce already placed, note on the counter for himself that said, water basil, done, which he underlined because completing little boxes makes a day behave. Before bed, he stood at the study doorway and looked at the yellow pad where he had written, in clean block letters, use paper, use timing, drive at dawn. And he touched the tin box, then left it closed, and in the dark he lay on Evelyn's side because it still smelled like lemon soap if you did not try too hard. And he slept, not because the week had been easy, but because the next hour had a key and a plan and a road that knew where it was going. He woke before the alarm, the room still dark, and moved like a man who had rehearsed the morning in his head. Coffee, toast, the last loop through the rooms, a hand on each switch and lock, the new notice on the inside of the glass level with a fingertip, the envelope for Joyce tucked under her mat with the spare keys and the note about Basil, the small suitcase by the door with the fireproof pouch under the shirts and the manila envelope in the side pocket, the brass key in his coat pocket, warm from being checked too many times. At 5:58, he turned the deadbolt, set the alarm, and stepped out into a thin, clean cold that made breath look like proof, pulled the door shut soft, and stood 1 second to listen to the house settle behind wood and glass, the way a good friend settles after a hard talk. Then he walked to the truck, started the engine, and let the heater speak first. The road east out of Lancaster was mostly his. A few milk trucks and a school bus with lights blinking in the blue half hour. And he kept the radio off because news wasn't the kind of company he wanted. He took the same route he used to take with Evelyn when they wanted to see water without planning for it. South and east, bridges and tolls, a Wawa coffee he did not need but bought anyway because a lid is permission to keep going. The parkway with its thin winter trees, gulls appearing before the scent of salt did. Then long flat lanes that felt like someone had ironed the map. The phone stayed on Do Not Disturb except for Harold and Beth, and no calls came. He stopped once at a rest area to tighten the strap on the suitcase because small checks are the way you tell yourself you still deserve luck. And he was back on the road before the sun had decided if it would be a bright day or a pale one. By the time he saw the bay, the sky had gone soft and wide, the water the color of steel that forgives, and the little town gave itself away in white porches and blue shutters, and the kind of flag that remembers to take itself down in storms. He turned onto a narrower street, then a lane with low stone and sandgrass, and the house announced itself the way Evelyn had described it once when she came here alone between scans. White clapboard, blue trim, red tile that made sense somehow, a side door that misbehaved when it rained. Rosa stood waiting on the small porch, hands in the pockets of a sweater that had seen kitchens, hair pulled back like work would follow the greeting. Her face changing when she saw him, the way faces do when a puzzle piece finally arrives. Senhor Marcus, she said. And before he could decide if he was a man who hugged strangers, she made the decision for him and held him like this was not a transaction, then stepped back and smiled at his pocket as if she could see the key through the coat. Push with your hip, she said. Today the air is wet. And they both laughed in the quiet way people laugh when they agree on something simple. The side door stuck like a door that wanted to be asked. He pushed with his hip as instructed, and it let them in with a small surrender. The house smelled of salt and lemon soap and wood that had not been lied to. The floors were cool. The living room opened toward light. There was a table that invited elbows and a small shelf with bowls that did not match and had no reason to. A kitchen with blue tile the color of a good sky, and a bowl of lemons already set there like a habit. 2 cups upside down beside a kettle. A handwritten card in Evelyn's tidy block letters tucked by the stove. Add water, not hurry. Rosa moved through the rooms with a light hand, showing without insisting. Clean linens in the closet, fresh towels folded 3 deep, a short binder on the counter with utility numbers, a list of who to call when storms take wires down. A note about the man who fixed shutters and refused to overcharge. A shallow drawer in the desk with a small object wrapped in brown paper and string. "She left this," Rosa said, and placed the wrapped thing on the table and did not watch him open it. Inside was a flat tin the size of a wallet and the weight of a palm, and in the tin a key no bigger than the first joint of his thumb with a paper tag that said in block letters, "Bayshore Savings, Box 12." And underneath it, a single folded sheet with 3 lines in Evelyn's hand, square and certain. "If you are here, the noise got too loud. There is a safety deposit box. There is also money in certificates, so boring they will save your life. Use them for distance and for Lily. Don't ever argue with a person who counts what isn't theirs." And there were numbers, not pages of them, just enough to make a shape. $480,000 total across CDs rolling in 4 steps, dates marked with simple arrows, the bank name that matched the key tag. He did not sit right away. He put his hand flat on the table and let his breath catch up to the paper. Then he reached for his yellow pad and wrote 3 lines of his own. Box 12, 4 CDs, laddered, no movement today, and underlined the last line because he knew the difference between discovery and impulse. Rosa set a bowl on the table with bread and a small dish of something green and bright that tasted like the idea of a garden, and insisted he eat, and he did. Not because he was hungry, because the body needs proof of welcome. When the plate was lighter, she sat across from him and told the story. Evelyn had bought and paid for with time. How Rosa's husband had left her with debts in her name and a landlord who preferred threats to letters. How Evelyn had walked her to legal aid and sat while the woman explained every form twice. How she had knocked on the landlord's door with Rosa and said, "You will put this in writing or you will leave this house," in a voice that did not need to climb to be heard. How later, when Rosa's mother was sick, Evelyn brought soup and changed sheets and joked that she needed practice before she could help Americans correctly. "She saved my name," Rosa said, eyes doing that wet thing that is not weakness. "So when she asked me to keep this place ready, I promised like church." And Marcus said thank you in a way that made the words feel like they had weight. They walked the small rooms together. That bedroom with a window that knew how to invite wind without letting it make a mess. A dresser with 2 smooth stones in a bowl and a space where a photo wanted to live. A bathroom with a window that let you hear the sea count. A little back porch with 2 chairs that looked like they forgave posture. Rosa pointed at the desk drawer again and said, "There is also the caretaker letter from the Lisbon. No, the Cape May. Office you signed?" He nodded, took it out, saw the stamped copy Harold had arranged to courier back, tucked it with the tin box and the key in the pouch in his bag, and felt something in his chest settle into a new set of shelves. He called Harold from the house phone because Rosa said cell service pretends here, told him in 3 sentences what he had found and what he had not done. And Harold said, "We will not touch a dollar today. We will draft a trust that keeps it boring. Enjoy the salt." And they hung up without decorating the call with more words than it deserved. Alone for an hour, while Rosa went to fetch a loaf from the bakery and a story from the square, Marcus opened a second drawer and found a thin notebook with a cover the color of clear sky. Inside, the first page in Evelyn's hand again. "Brave looks like keys and paper. If you are reading this, still breathe." And he did, and then he walked room by room and put small things where they wanted to be. His photo of her at the apple tree on the dresser, the yellow pad and pen on the table, the brass key on the little dish by the door, his coat on a hook that did not complain. Later, Rosa came back with bread and a laugh about the fishman who thinks every stranger is lost, left them on the counter, and raised a hand like a sailor before leaving, so he would know she was not vanishing, but simply stepping away to let the house do its work. He took the small key with the paper tag and walked 2 blocks to Bayshore Savings, a low building with an old clock and a teller who looked like she was already tired of everyone's emergencies. Asked for access to Box 12, showed license and the Cape May letter identifying him by name, signed where a pen told him to, and then sat in a little room with a metal drawer and air that wanted to be less serious. He turned the lock, lifted the lid, and found the things described. 4 certificates, boring on purpose, numbers matching the note, copies of the beneficiary designations already naming a trust he had not seen before. Juniper Street Trust, Evelyn's invention, which was exactly like her to call a thing by a plant that knows how to live through a winter. There was also one envelope at the bottom with his name in her hand, lighter than fear and heavier than comfort. Use the money for distance, not for a fight. If you cannot teach them with gentleness, let time do it. It likes its job. He put everything back the way it had been, locked the box, thanked the teller with a nod the size of an honest coin, and walked back with the wind in his coat and the sea saying the same thing it always says, over and over, until a person decides to hear it. At the house, he sliced the bread, put a lemon in the bowl on the table, and rolled it under his palm until the air agreed to join them, wrote 3 more lines on the pad. Call Beth Sunday. Tell nothing. Pie at 2. And drew little boxes next to each. He did not feel triumphant. He felt level, which was better than any victory he had imagined when Derek said the word sold into his kitchen. At dusk, he took one of the chairs onto the back porch, set it where he could see the sliver of water between 2 roofs, and sat until the light dropped and the day clicked shut like a good drawer. When he went inside, he locked the side door, pushed with his hip to check the seal, washed 1 plate and 1 cup, and left the notebook open to the page where Evelyn had told him to keep breathing. Because he had. And because tomorrow would need the same work done again. And because secrets handled with care are not lies, they are tools you set down only when the job is done. Morning at the Cape May house began the way Marcus hoped it would begin, with a small sound from the water and a larger silence inside the walls. He woke before the light was strong, put the kettle on, and stood by the side door to feel the damp air that made the wood swell. He pushed the door with his hip, just as Rosa had told him, and the latch settled. A simple problem with a simple fix. He made toast, sliced the bread Rosa brought, rolled a lemon under his palm until the scent rose, and ate at the little table without turning on a radio, because quiet helped him think in straight lines. Then he opened the blue notebook Evelyn had left and wrote 3 things in neat block letters. Bank box checked. No money moved. Call Harold at 9. He rinsed the plate, put the cup on the rack, and walked the rooms like a man learning a new map, touching nothing he did not have to, noting where the light fell, where the floor wanted care, which window needed a turn of the latch to sit right. At 9, he used the house phone because cell service pretended here and told Harold what he had found the day before. The tin, the little key, the 4 laddered CDs that together made $480,000, the trust name Evelyn had already chosen, Juniper Street, and the envelope that told him to let money be boring and to use it for distance and Lily. We will keep it boring. Harold said, steady. I will draft a simple addendum and a short letter to the bank so they will add your signature to the trust records without moving maturity dates. Enjoy the salt. Do not touch the CDs until we speak again. And Marcus said, I won't, and felt the relief of being told not to hurry. He walked into town after that because his feet needed a job, bought eggs and 2 apples from a market with a crooked sign, learned the name of the bakery woman who already knew Rosa by sight, and carried a small bag back along a lane that liked low voices. Rosa met him at the gate with a screwdriver in her hand and said, "Hinge first." And he laughed, because people who know work always point at the right thing first. They fixed the door in 10 minutes by backing the screws out and seating them tight into new holes. And the door sat truer under his palm. Then she showed him the breaker box, the water shutoff, the folder with utility accounts, and the place under the sink where the cleanser lived, and did not speak to him like a child while she did it. At 11:15, the Cape May house phone rang, and he answered. It was Joyce from Lancaster, voice small from distance but sharp enough to carry. 2 men came by your porch around 10, she said. One in a suit, one with a tape measure, said they had a showing. I pointed to the sign and stood on the steps and called the non-emergency number. They left quick. Police did a drive-by after. Your sign is a good sign. And he thanked her and said, Pie Sunday. And she said, "I will bring the basil story you like," and hung up. He sent a short message to Harold from the little desk. "Front step visitors at 10. Joyce called police. Sign did its work." And Harold sent back a single word: logged. At noon, he sat at the table with his yellow pad and wrote a clean list. Call bank to add signature to trust file. Set local P.O. box. Buy extra copy key. Return Saturday. Pie Sunday. Tell Lily nothing heavy yet. And put small boxes next to each line because he liked to see progress. The quiet mystery of the day came at 1:07 when someone knocked on the side door. 3 quick taps like a person who thinks speed is permission. A man in a tan jacket stood on the porch with a clipboard, said he was there to check smoke alarms for the township. Rosa, who had been in the kitchen making coffee, stepped forward and asked for an ID badge and a work order number. The man smiled, not with his eyes, and said it was routine, and Rosa asked again for a badge. He did not have one. Marcus lifted the small notebook from the table and said in a calm voice, "We will call the township office and ask." And the man made his mouth into a polite shape and said there was no need, then turned and walked away. Rosa raised an eyebrow that said enough, and Marcus, who had learned to use slow tools, walked to the porch rail and wrote the plate number down, then called the township office and spoke to a clerk who said they do not do unannounced checks like that, especially not on Thursdays, and he wrote another neat line on his pad: "Not a real inspector." And under it, "Send plate to Harold," which he did in a short message with no extra words. The house felt like it approved. It is good when a door is not fooled. He went to Bayshore Savings after lunch, not to open the box again, but to ask a question at a real desk about adding his signature to the trust file. The teller called a manager. The manager called their legal department, and the answer came back polite and clear. With the Cape May affidavit Harold had couriered, and the trust name Evelyn had already created, they could file a note so future correspondence came to him, and Harold both, and no CD would be disturbed. He signed a single form, kept his copy in the pouch, and walked out into a wind that tasted clean. On the way back, he stopped at the post office and rented a small box for 3 months, used his Pennsylvania P.O. box as a mailing address so nothing loud had to land on any porch, and put the tiny key on the same ring as the house key because he liked the sound of them together. In the late afternoon, Beth's name flashed on his American phone, which he had turned on for an hour on purpose, and he let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice was thin, but not sharp. "Lily wants to know if you'll be home Sunday," she said. "She wants to bring the new gloves to the garden." And he said, "Yes, home Saturday night, pie Sunday at 2, no house talk." And Beth said, "Okay," and then with something like work in her tone, "I'm practicing." And he said, "I know," and it felt like a small shelf had been added to a wall that needed one. After the call, a short message from Derek arrived, a single line that pretended to be a question. "We need the basement key for a contractor Monday." And Marcus did not answer, because sometimes silence is the only honest word left. He wrote another line on the pad. "If he asks again, say porch is for people who know my first name," and drew a small box and checked it because he had already said it once. Evening laid down simple. He sliced a second piece of bread, ate it with the olive mix Rosa had left and a tomato she said would taste like a real tomato if he let it sit in the sun. Then he washed the plate, wiped the table, and opened the tin one more time to look at the little key and the folded paper with Evelyn's square letters. He read the last sentence again because it calmed him. "Do not argue with a person who counts what isn't theirs." And then he took out a fresh sheet from the yellow pad and wrote a letter to Lily that he did not seal. "There is something of your grandmother's we will open together when you fix the next hinge by yourself." And he put the letter under the bowl of lemons like ballast. At dusk, Rosa knocked once and then said her name the way good neighbors do, brought 2 cookies on a small plate and a story about the man at the square who swears he can tell the weather by the smell of rope. And Marcus listened, because stories are another kind of tool that keep the bad air from filling a room. After she left, he stood on the back steps and watched the narrow strip of water between roofs and let the sound do the work of proof. Before bed, he set his small suitcase by the door, tucked the fireproof pouch under the shirts, put the tin and the bank form back in the pouch, and laid the brass key on the little dish by the door so his hand would learn the reach without looking. He checked the side door by pushing with his hip and smiled when it matched the frame. He turned his phone back to Do Not Disturb except for Harold and Beth, set the house phone on the hook with the cord coiled right, and wrote one last line on the pad. Return Saturday early. Lock, pie, talk about apples, not about square feet. And underlined apples because he meant to teach a young person how to keep what matters by starting with a tree. He lay down in the small bedroom, set Evelyn's photo on the dresser where the two stones sat, and let the house make its clean sounds around him. The kind you get when doors are honest and money is boring and people who love you stop counting what is not theirs. Sleep arrived the way good sleep does when a plan is simple and the next step is already on paper. Saturday began clean and early in Cape May, the air cool and a little damp, and Marcus moved through the small house the way he had promised himself he would. Slow, careful, leaving things better than he found them. He boiled water, made toast, rolled a lemon under his palm until the smell rose, ate at the little table, then washed the plate and cup and set them back where Rosa had shown him. He checked each window latch, pushed the side door with his hip just to feel it catch right, and wrote one neat line on his yellow pad. Drive home, Pie Sunday, no house talk, with a small box beside it that he meant to check later. Rosa came by at 7 with a small paper bag and said, "Bread for your neighbor," and he thanked her and told her he would be back soon, probably next week. And she nodded once, like a person who believed him because she trusted her own eyes. He put the tin with the tiny bank key and the Cape May bank form back into the fireproof pouch, slipped the pouch under the folded shirts in his small suitcase, laid his wallet photo of Evelyn on top, and carried the bag to the door. Before he left, he placed a fresh lemon in the bowl on the table and slid the blue notebook so it covered half the bowl. Not because the lemon needed covering, because he liked knowing the notebook would be the first thing he saw next time. The drive north was quiet. No radio, the heater clicking on and off, a Wawa coffee he did not need but held anyway. The parkway long and flat, bridges coming and then going, traffic light enough to let a man think in straight lines. Once, near the tolls, he pulled off to a rest area and tightened the strap on the suitcase because small checks help a plan stay steady. Near 10, he called Harold from the truck's hands-free and said only what mattered. Bank noted the trust name. No CDs touched. Caretaker letter filed. Township inspector yesterday was not real. Plate number sent. And Harold said, good and logged. And we'll draft the addendum Monday. In the tone of a man who knows paper is a tool, not a theater. By noon, Marcus turned onto his own street and saw home the way he wanted to see it. Notice on the inside of the glass level. Curtains as he left them. Basil pot still green from Joyce's watering. Porch light off. Mat straight. He parked, lifted the suitcase, and stopped because a glossy brochure had been slid between the door and the frame. A photo of a smiling couple at a condo pool, and a sticky note stuck to the front in a handwriting he knew too well. Derek's quick, long letters. Think about it. Final offer is good. D. Marcus took a picture of the brochure on the threshold with the time showing, then slid the paper into a plastic sleeve and set it on the counter. He texted Harold the photo with 2 words, left today, and then he unlocked the deadbolt, opened the door, and stepped into his own kitchen. He set the suitcase by the chair, put the fireproof pouch in the study safe, returned the tin to the shelf in the safe, closed the steel door, spun the dial, and stood a moment with his hand flat on the wood top of the desk until his breath matched the room. The house smelled the same as when he left. Lemon oil, coffee, old wood that tells the truth. So he checked the windows, reset the alarm, and then walked next door with the little bakery loaf in a paper bag for Joyce. She opened her door before he knocked, the way old neighbors do, and said, "You look rested." And he said, "I had salt air," and handed her the bread. She told him again about the 2 men Thursday morning, the suit and the tape measure, how she stood on his steps and pointed to the sign, how the officer drove by slow, how the men left with their shoulders up like they had been told no by someone who meant it. He thanked her, told her pie was Sunday at 2 if she wanted a slice, and she said, "I'll bring the Basil story," and laughed because it had become a small joke between them. Back in his kitchen, he took out the butter to soften, set 4 lemons on the counter like a promise, and pulled Evelyn's stained recipe card from the tin. "Lemon pie. Bake until the middle says yes," and stood it against the sugar jar. His phone buzzed with a text from Beth. "Still good for 2 tomorrow? Lily has new gloves." And he typed back, "Yes. Bring gloves. No house talk." And she wrote, "Okay," without extra words, which made him think practice was doing its work. At 1, he walked to the mailbox at the curb and found 3 envelopes, nothing important, and 1 white one with a realtor logo and urgent stamped in red. He did not open it. He took a photo of the front and the back and slid it into a larger envelope addressed to Harold with a note. "For your file, not opened," and set it by the door to mail later. He printed a second copy of the "No showings, no listing, all contact in writing to council notice," and taped it on the inside of the side door window so the same sentence watched both approaches. In the afternoon, he made the crust, kept his hands light with the flour the way Evelyn had taught him, pressed the dough into the dish and set it in the fridge to rest, then squeezed lemons and whisked the filling slow until the sugar said yes. The doorbell rang at 3:42. 2 short, 1 long. Derek's pattern. And Marcus checked the peephole and saw Derek alone on the porch with a folder in his hand and eyes that were too bright. Marcus opened the door only as far as the chain and waited. "We need to settle this, Marcus," Derek said, skipping hello, and lifted the folder like a badge. "We have a buyer ready to close this month. You don't have to do anything, just sign. We'll take care of the rest." And Marcus said, calm, "No." And when Derek started again, "Quick, conservatorship." Marcus raised a hand and said, "File it or stop saying it. Sunday is for pie. Legal matters go to Harold." And he nodded toward the sign on the glass, because he preferred to let a sentence in big letters do some of the heavy lifting. "You're being stubborn," Derek said, and smiled the wrong kind of smile, the kind that asks for applause you did not earn. "This is a good number," and Marcus kept his voice even. "Numbers are not the point." Then left the quiet hang until Derek had to pick it up. Derek pushed a paper through the gap until the chain stopped it and the edge bent, and Marcus did not touch the paper. "Pick that up," Derek said, as if he were talking to a child. And Marcus looked at him the way you look at a man who has mistaken your porch for an office and said, "Sunday, 2, pie." And then he closed the door slow so the chain fell into place with a small sound that meant finished. Through the peephole, he watched Derek stare at the door, then at the sign, then step back and take a photo of the notice like he could make the words behave differently if he captured them, and finally leave. Marcus sent Harold a text. Derek came. Used C-ship again. Pushed paper. Not accepted. Audio available if needed. And set his phone down with the face toward the table because staring at it did not help. He baked the pie just before 5 so it would cool right. And while it was in the oven, he wrote 3 lines on his pad. Beth, practice. Hinge tomorrow. Derek, porch is for first names. And put small boxes by each so he could check them off with a pen and not a feeling. When the oven dinged, he pulled the pie and set it on the rack by the window where the air could get at it. Evening came in thin and even, and he ate a simple supper standing, rinsed his plate, and put it where it lived. He walked one last loop of the house. Front door locked, side door latched, sign secure, study safe closed, pouch shelved, suitcase tucked back in the closet. And then sat at the kitchen table and wrote a short note to Lily on a plain card. Tomorrow, you and I fix the second hinge and pick the first rosemary of spring. After that, we will open something of Grandma's together. Bring the small driver. And he slid the card under the bowl of lemons like a weight. Before bed, he stepped onto the porch and looked at the street. Quiet. Same old porch lights. Joyce's cat pretending to be a sentry. Wind light in the apple tree. He went inside, turned the deadbolt, and set his phone to do not disturb except for Beth and Harold. In the dark, he lay on his side of the bed and listened to the house settle and felt the steady shape of the next day. Pie at 2, garden first, hinge second, no house talk, no papers passed by chain. And he slept, not because the trouble was gone, but because a plan that fits will carry a man through the night. Sunday began plain and bright, the kind of Lancaster morning that makes coffee taste like a choice. And Marcus moved through it the way he had promised himself he would. Slow, steady, nothing dramatic. He cracked the kitchen window an inch, checked the deadbolt, set the lemon pie on the counter to lose its chill, and wrote one clean line on the yellow pad. Garden first, hinge second, pie at 2, no house talk. And drew a small box next to it because boxes kept days honest. At 9, he stepped into the yard in his coat and touched the rosemary with the back of his hand to feel how stubborn it stayed even when the air was thin. Then came inside and put 2 drivers on the table, the small Phillips and the stubby flathead, so he would not have to hunt later. At 11:48, tires on gravel, and Beth's sedan eased in behind his truck. Lily hopped out first with her gloves in her back pocket and her ponytail tight like a plan. And Beth followed slower, a bakery bag in her hand and a face that looked like she was trying on patience. "Morning?" Marcus said, and he set his palm on the warm edge of the pie dish as if to remind himself the day had its own shape. "Garden first," he added, and Lily grinned like someone who remembered the order of things. They walked the stone path together. He showed her where winter's leaves kept their grip, and she crouched and cleared them without tearing the young shoots. "Some plants forgive bad cuts," he said. "Rosemary does." And he let her take the small clippers and decide which sprig to trim. Beth stood with her hands in her coat and watched the two of them, her mouth making a shape like she wanted to speak and was practicing not to. When the path looked like a path again, they went to the shed, and Lily pulled out the driver set. "Which one?" she asked, looking at the hinge, and he nodded at the number 2 Phillips. She set the tip, twisted once, twice, and the screw bit. The hinge settled without argument. "It's the right size that makes it easy," Marcus said, and she smiled like a person who had learned something she could use again. He checked the door twice, because checking twice turns luck into habit, and it held. Back in the kitchen, he washed their hands at the sink and let the warm water run longer than it needed to, because the house sounded right when it did. He set a lemon on the table and rolled it under their palms until the scent rose. "Pie at 2, he said to both. Not a rule, a reminder, and Beth nodded like she meant to keep it. Then Marcus walked to the study and opened the safe and took out the flat tin he had not opened all week, the one that felt like a small book in the hand. He set it on the table and let it sit a moment like a guest who should be greeted properly. "Your grandmother left this," he said, looking at Lily. "I think part of it is for you." And Beth drew in breath, but did not speak. Lily rested her fingertips on the lid and waited, and that small waiting made him prouder than any quickness would have. He opened the tin. Inside lay a folded envelope with Lily's name in Evelyn's square letters. A narrow recipe card that said, "Lemon pie. Teach her to roll lemons," a thin silver locket on a short chain that had belonged to Evelyn when she was 19, and a single old savings bond, matured long ago, made out to Lily Ann. In a handwriting Marcus recognized from a bank day when Lily was still in a stroller. He slid the envelope toward Lily. She looked at Beth for a second as if to ask permission, and Beth nodded. Then, Lily opened it with careful fingers. The letter was short because Evelyn never used 5 words when 3 did the job. "Lily, if this finds you, it means your grandpa is doing something brave. Brave looks boring. Paper, keys, saying no and yes would be easier. Keep what is yours. Don't let people who love you make you smaller. Fix hinges. Roll lemons. I love you. Grandma." Lily pressed her lips together the way people do when a smile and a cry want the same space, and then she put the letter back in the envelope and held it with 2 hands. Beth's eyes shone, and she made a small sound, but did not rush to fill the room. Marcus lifted the locket and turned it so the tiny hinge showed. "It still opens," he said, and clicked it with his thumb. Inside was Evelyn's high school photo, and a blank oval where another picture should go. "We'll print one of you," he said to Lily, and Lily nodded like a promise. He tapped the bond, but did not make it into a lesson, only said, "Something your grandmother started. We'll see about it later with Harold." And he closed the tin because you do not put the whole future on the table at once. The doorbell rang at 1:12. two short, one long, and Marcus felt his jaw want an old habit. He glanced at the sign on the glass and the chain and the clock, and then at the words on his pad, "No house talk." And he let the habit pass. He opened to the chain. Derek stood there in a navy sweater, empty hands, two bright eyes. "Marcus," he said, skipping hello, "can we talk? It won't take long." And Marcus said, "2 o'clock is for pie. If you're here for pie, the porch is yours. If you're here for paper, Monday belongs to Harold." And Derek's mouth made a line. Behind Marcus, Lily slid the letter into her coat, and Beth reached for her elbow on reflex and then let go. Derek saw Lily first, then Beth, and the set of his face changed a degree. "I'll be back at 2, he said, like a dare and a concession, and he stepped back and took a photo of the notice on the glass because he still believed paper could be pushed around by a phone. "Bring a fork," Marcus said, and closed the door gentle so the chain made the small click that says a boundary is not a wall, only a door that knows its job. At 2, Joyce arrived from next door with a little pot of basil that looked too hopeful for February, and a story ready about the time her late husband misread a seed packet and planted pumpkins under the mailbox. She stood on the porch and eyed the empty step where men had stood Thursday, and then she came in, and the house felt larger. Marcus cut the pie and set plates on the table and kept a slice near the door for the porch, because rules should have a shape. At 2:07. Derek returned, no folder this time, hands in his pockets like a person trying to remember how to be invited. Marcus opened to the chain, lifted the plate, and handed it through. "Porch?" Marcus said. "Porch," Derek agreed. He sat on the top step like a man who had learned one thing the hard way. Joyce took her first bite and made the small sound that means the middle said yes. Lily sat next to the pie and kept her hands on her envelope and her locket and looked like someone who had been given a job she wanted. Beth lifted her fork, set it down, and then tried again. "I'm practicing," she said to no one in all of them, "to not fix things that are not mine." And Joyce patted her wrist once as if to say that counted. Through the screen, Marcus heard Derek attempt small talk about the weather and stall out. He did not help. Some silences must do their own work. When Derek finished his slice, he stood. "Thank you," he said, and it sounded like a sentence he had not expected to say. "Monday," Marcus said. "You speak to Harold." And Derek nodded without haggling and walked to his car with his shoulders not quite as high as they had been. After the door closed, Beth breathed like she had been holding a weight and set her fork down with a clean clink. She looked at Marcus and did not ask him where he had been the past few days. And he did not tell her, because keeping something safe is not the same as hiding it. Instead, he slid the recipe card toward Lily. "Roll the lemon," he said, and Lily did, and the room smelled like the kind of advice you can follow. After pie, they went back outside to the shed to put the drivers away, and Marcus took the stubby flathead from the hook and handed it to Lily. "Keep this one," he said. "It fits more than it looks like it should," and Lily tucked it into her coat pocket next to the letter and the locket and stood a little taller. Beth touched the edge of the shed door and then her own coat and said, "I told Derek this morning that if he wants to talk legal, he can call Harold. I didn't tell him we were coming. I am trying to learn the difference between a warning and a boundary." And Marcus said, "Practice." Because practice was the only word worth using twice in a day. Joyce lingered on the porch and told her Basil story the way she always told it, with the same wrong month and the same right laugh, and the kitchen absorbed the sound like it had been waiting for soft voices. When the plates were washed and dried and put back, Beth and Lily stood at the door with their coats on. "Next Sunday?" Beth asked, and Marcus said, "Yes. Garden first, hinge if needed, pie at 2. And Lily tapped her coat pocket to show she had the letter and the driver and the locket, and then she hugged him with both arms. "We'll print the picture," she said into his shirt, and he said, "We will." They left, and the house settled into the good kind of quiet again. Marcus wiped the table with the lemon oil cloth, set the tin back in the safe, turned the dial until the tumblers agreed, and sat at the table with the yellow pad. He drew 3 small boxes and wrote next to them, "Call Harold. Trust Addendum Monday. Ask Rodriguez. Monday 7 a.m. pickup. Teach Lily. Keep what matters." And he checked the last one because the day had done that on its own. Before he turned off the kitchen light, he set the locket on the dresser for the night so it could learn the room, and he laid Evelyn's recipe card against the sugar jar again because some instructions should never go back in a drawer. When he lay down, he did not count the ways the next week could go wrong. He counted the steps that were already on paper, and he slept like a man whose plan matched his house. Monday started before daylight, the house cool and honest, and Marcus moved in it the way work asks you to move when you want the day to go right. He put coffee on, pulled the basement light chain, and stood at the bottom of the steps looking at the neat stacks he had made the night before. 12 boxes that were not his, Beth and Derek's old sports gear, holiday bins, a box of office binders with Derek's name on the spine, 2 tubs marked Miss Garage in Derek's quick hand, plus a long plastic case with a broken latch that had lived under Marcus's workbench for 3 years. He wrote labels in his neat block letters and taped them straight. Return, Beth and Derek, basement storage, and set a short note on the top box. I am returning what is yours. Please store your own things at your own house. At 6:58, he switched on the porch light and waited with the front door open to the chain. At 7:01, the truck eased to the curb, white cab, liftgate, and Rodriguez climbed down in a jacket that had seen winter and said, "Morning, Mr. Hale," with the calm of a man who is good at his job. Marcus pointed to the basement, gave the address, and added, "Ask for a signature. If they won't sign, take a time-stamped photo." And Rodriguez nodded once and repeated the instructions word for word. The 2 helpers moved like people who had learned that speed without noise is a kind of respect. Dollies down, boxes up, a soft clack when the liftgate rose. Joyce waved from her porch and called, "Clean out day?" And he said, "Only returns." And she laughed because she liked the taste of that phrase. By 7:28, the truck pulled away, taillights blinking, and the basement looked larger, not empty, just honest. At 8:10, Harold called, voice steady like a level on wood. "I have the trust addendum ready," he said, "and a short covenant for the garden strip you wanted. 15 feet from the back step to the rosemary and lemon tree. No one can remove or pave it without your signed consent. I'll bring copies at 10. Also, your inspector plate traces to a rental, not the township. I've sent a letter to Derek's realtor and his counsel reminding them that false representation of authority will be introduced as evidence if they continue. Keep your log." Marcus thanked him and wrote a line on the yellow pad. 10. Sign with Harold. He walked to the post office with the realtor envelope he had not opened, slid it into a bigger one to Harold with the note, "For your file, unopened," rented 2 booklets of stamps, and was home by 9:30. The kitchen window caught weak sun. The pie plate from yesterday washed and dry in the rack, Evelyn's recipe card leaning against the sugar jar like a rule that never needed a new version. At 9:52, his phone buzzed. A photo from Rodriguez of the boxes stacked on Beth and Derek's porch, note visible on top, time and date stamped at the corner. A second photo showed Derek's hand in the frame with the signature line ignored. "Delivered," Rodriguez typed. "No signature. Photo taken." Marcus sent back, "Thank you. Paid on delivery as agreed," and put the phone face down because staring at it did not improve it. At 10:03, Harold arrived in a navy suit, set a yellow legal pad on the table, and slid over 2 slim packets. The first read Juniper Street Trust, Addendum, with a single page for his signature and Harold's witness line. The second read Evelyn Garden Covenant, 2 copies, simple language that even a person trying to be difficult would understand. "You sign here and here," Harold said. "I'll file these this afternoon. The trust addendum notifies Bay Shore that you are co-trustee and primary contact. No CD moves without your written instruction. The covenant records with the county, so anyone searching title sees it." And Marcus signed the lines slow, careful, the way a person who has learned not to hurry touches a pen. Harold sealed the packets into big envelopes and wrote county names in the corner like a man who likes paper to behave. "One more thing," Harold added, taking out a single sheet with firm type. "A notice for the inside of your door. No agents, no showings, all contact to council. It is not law, but it tells the truth. We've already mailed certified cease and desist to the realtor and Derek's attorney. If they step on your porch with paper, do not take it with your hands. Ask them to drop it and step back. We keep a clean chain." Marcus set the notice on the inside glass beside the first one. The words looked like a pair of shoulders holding a line together. At noon, a courier rang with a certified letter from Hawthorne Realty. Marcus signed, set it on the table without opening it, took 2 photos, front and back, and texted them to Harold. "Hold unopened," Harold replied. "I'll pick it up at 2. Let their urgency work for you." The day went quiet again. He made an egg, ate it standing, rinsed the pan, dried it, and put it away. At 1:06, a message from Beth arrived. Boxes showed up. "I told Derek to make room in our garage. Practicing." And he wrote back, "Good. Practice is work," and left it there. At 1:19, a dark sedan slowed in front of his house, rolled past, then came back and paused just long enough for a person to read the sign. Marcus wrote down the plate on his pad and the time and underlined it once. At 1:41, Rodriguez sent a third photo, this one of the boxes now inside Beth's garage, the door half down, the note still on top. "Complete," he wrote. Marcus replied with a thumb, then walked to the basement and stood in the new space. The concrete smelled faintly of lemon oil because everything in his life smelled that way now. He swept in long, even pulls, not to clean for company, to tell the house he understood how to keep something. At 2:12, Harold came back for the certified letter, shook his head at the realtor logo, slid the envelope into his briefcase without breaking the seal, and said, "If they threaten conservatorship again, we will respond with 2 things. Recordings you already have, and a short letter from your primary doctor affirming capacity. Do you want me to set that appointment?" And Marcus said, "Yes, Wednesday morning is good," because he preferred proof to arguments. Harold left with a small, satisfied nod, and the door clicked shut like a sentence ending where it should. Late afternoon brought quiet jobs. He rotated the no showings notice so it sat level, oiled the side door hinge so the push with his hip would be easier, sharpened the pencil he kept by the phone, printed 1 photo of Lily from last summer to fit inside the locket, and set the little oval on the dresser so the room could learn its new brightness. At 4:37, Derek texted a single line that tried to sound like civility and failed. "You didn't have to make a scene with the boxes," and Marcus typed, "I did not. I made a return," and did not hit send. Instead, he turned the phone face down, wrote the sentence on his pad, and drew a box next to it, because not sending can also be something you finish. Evening came in with the small sounds he trusted, the heat kicking on, the clock in the hall counting in an honest way, Joyce's screen door sighing once and then done. He set 2 lemons in the bowl so the room knew what week it was and wrote a short list for Tuesday. Call Lily. Print done. Call doctor. Wednesday. Check P.O. box. And then he sat a moment longer just to feel the house hold its shape without help. It did, and that was the point. Tuesday started simple and early, the house cool and honest, and Marcus moved the way he liked. Coffee on, window cracked an inch, deadbolt turned and felt, lemon rolled under his palm until the scent rose. Then he wrote 3 clear lines on the yellow pad with small boxes beside them. Track receipts, bank confirm file, prep for Dr. Singh, list of daily tasks. He set the green certified slips on the table and used his phone to check the tracking numbers. 2 showed delivered to the county recorder at 10:43 p.m. the night before, 1 to Bayshore Savings just after 8. He drew a neat check in the first box and wrote the times beside them because times make a day sit still. At 8:35, he dialed Bayshore from the landline so static would not pretend to be part of the talk. A clerk named Denise answered, put him on a brief hold, then came back with the good sentence people in offices practice. Your correspondence is received and noted. The Juniper Street Trust is on file for future mail. And he said thank you and wrote, Bayshore noted, 8:38, and put a line through the second box. He called Dr. Singh's office next, confirmed Wednesday at 10, wrote down the clerk's soft instruction. Bring ID, bring medication list, bring any paperwork that shows what you handle day to day. And when he hung up, he pulled a clean sheet and began a list in block letters. Bills paid, PPL, water, trash, taxes, grocery Tuesday, trash day Wednesday, garden, rosemary check, apple tree mulch, safety, smoke alarm test first Sunday, deadbolt other nights, banking, reconcile first of month, neighbor, Joyce Basil, watch porch. He added, Cape May, Rosa, door latch, water shutoff, and underlined it because simple facts steady a room. At 10:32, someone knocked. 3 quick taps, and when Marcus looked through the peephole, a man stood on the porch with a clipboard and a windbreaker that said nothing. The man smiled like speed was permission and said, "Pre-inspection for a pending buyer." And Marcus left the chain set, stepped to the table, picked up the one-page reply Harold had drafted, slid it through the gap so the chain held the door, and said evenly, "All communications to counsel. No inspections authorized." Then waited. The man took the page, glanced at the big bold line at the top, and said, "We can do this the easy way." And Marcus said, "We are doing it the easy way." And the man's smile fell off his face. He turned, walked to a tan sedan idling at the curb, and drove away. Marcus wrote the plate number on the pad, 1034, tan sedan PA KZG, and then called the non-emergency number to log the visit. The dispatcher said an officer would swing by and that the porch sign was clear. Marcus thanked her and drew a small square next to porch visit logged and filled it in because small boxes tame big nonsense. At 11:15, Beth called from her car. The blinker clicked under her words. "He's angry," she said without naming Derek, "but he signed for the boxes. The golf bag is leaning against our door like a dog." And then, quieter, "I told him to stop using the word conservatorship in our kitchen. I said if he has a point, he can make it to Harold." And Marcus said, "Good, and practice." And Beth said, "I'm practicing," and told him Lily wore the locket to class, checked its tiny hinge twice, and tucked the letter into the inside pocket of her coat. Marcus said, "Tell her the letter likes the sound of paper moving," and Beth laughed once, real, and ended the call before it turned into apologies. At noon, he made a sandwich, ate standing at the sink because chairs can be too much when the day still has edges, then sat again and put together a thin manila folder for tomorrow. Driver's license, Medicare card, the list he'd just written, the receipt from the county, a copy of Harold's letter that said in simple words that Marcus owned his house and had counsel and would not be meeting strangers in his basement. He placed the folder by the door and wrote, "Folder by door" on the pad, because writing it down is a way to tell your hands where to go. At 12:47, his phone buzzed with a final photo from Rodriguez, a slightly tilted shot of Derek's porch, boxes signed for, the small card, "Returning what is yours" visible. Marcus saved it, texted "thank you," got back a simple thumbs up, and drew a check next to "returns complete." At 1:10, a black sedan idled across the street longer than ordinary. Marcus stood behind the curtain without hiding, wrote the plate, and watered the basil while Joyce's cat pretended to be part of security. The sedan eased away, and he wrote, 1:14. Black sedan moved on, and did not give it more than that. At 1:32, Harold called and spoke like a man who did not need volume to make a point. "Reply sent to their counsel," he said, "certified. Recorder acknowledged receipt of the addendum. Your garden covenant language is good. Helen Hale Garden it is. Capacity letter Wednesday at 10 with Dr. Nod Singh. Do not take any calls about evaluations unless they come from my office. And if anyone leaves an envelope without a stamp, photograph, and sleeve it." And Marcus said, "Understood," and wrote, "Garden covenant, filed," and put a line under it because it mattered. At 2:06, a courier in a brown jacket brought another white envelope, this one with a stamp and a return address from a law office Marcus did not know. Inside, a second intent letter with more words and the same soft threat. He read it once, slid it back into its sleeve, wrote 206, intent letter number 2, sleeved, and sent Harold a photo without adding adjectives because adjectives do not help paper behave. By mid-afternoon, the day relaxed a notch. He checked the side door by pushing it with his hip, liked the way it answered, and set 2 drivers on the hall table for tomorrow out of habit. He printed a second copy of his list for Dr. Singh and put it in the folder so nothing depended on a single piece of paper. He labeled his keys with tape and a pen. House, Cape May, P.O., and put them on a ring in the order his palm would want them. He called Rosa at 3:40 to say he might come down Friday and asked if the back door still needed a little hip. She said yes, and that the rain had tapped twice and gone, and there was a tiny drip by the laundry window she would watch. He told her to call the plumber she trusted if it woke up, and to put the bill in the file. She said, "I like boring bills." And he said, "Me too." And they hung up with a good kind of nothing left to say. At 4:12, a text from Derek appeared. This isn't over. And Marcus did the same thing he had done every time that sentence arrived from a man who still believed volume was a plan. He took a screenshot, time-stamped it on the pad, 412 text, forwarded, sent it to Harold, and did not answer because not answering is sometimes the work. He made a simple supper, eggs and toast, a slice of last night's pie, washed the plate, dried it, put it back in its spot, then sat with the yellow pad and wrote 3 lines with boxes. Leave 9:15 for Dr. Singh. Bring folder. Bank call. Confirm recorder file appears in system by Friday, and he checked the first 2 because they were already on the doormat in their way. Just before 7, Officer Miller from down the street stopped by, not in uniform, just a hat, and said he had been the one to look at the porch Thursday. He liked the sign. If the tan sedan returned, he would park around the corner at lunch. Marcus thanked him and did not make it more complicated. When the door shut, the house went back to its clean noises. The furnace clicking on, the old wood thinking about night. And Marcus put the folder by the door, set the pencil across the pad, and turned his phone to do not disturb except for Harold and Beth. In bed, he read the list for tomorrow one more time, not to memorize it, to let it tell him the morning already had a shape. Drive, sit on time, answer what is asked, keep it simple. And he slept, not because the trouble had ended, but because each piece now had a box, and the next box would open at 10 with his name written steady on the line. Wednesday came in clear and cold, and Marcus did the morning the way he liked. Coffee on, window cracked an inch, deadbolt turned and felt, a lemon rolled under his palm until the scent rose. Then he slid the manila folder he'd prepared onto the kitchen table and read the top page one more time. The list he had written for Dr. Singh. Bills he paid, trash day, smoke alarms for Sundays, garden notes on rosemary and the apple tree, the Cape May caretaker's name and number. The way the side door needed a small hip, he put his license and Medicare card behind it, checked that the green certified slips sat in the pocket, and wrote on the yellow pad with small boxes beside each line. Leave 9:15, capacity letter, copies plus certified, call Harold, print photo for locket. Because boxes keep hours honest when days want to wander. At 9:12, he locked the side door, pressed it with his hip to feel it answer, and drove the 10 minutes to Dr. Singh's office with the heater low and the radio off, the steady breath of tires on cold asphalt the only sound. He checked in at 9:28 and sat in a waiting room that smelled faintly of hand soap and old magazines. And when the nurse called Mr. Hart, he stood without hurry. Dr. Singh shook his hand and did not make small talk, which Marcus appreciated. In the exam room, the doctor asked simple questions first. Name, address, date, day of week. Then the ones that measure the shape of a life. What bills do you pay? How do you get groceries? Who do you call if the water heater fails? What is your plan if you travel? Marcus answered in the same steady tone he used when he showed Lily which hinge took which driver. PPL online on the 1st, water with a check, 2nd Tuesday, trash Wednesday morning, Joyce watches the porch. Officer Miller knows the sign. The Cape May house has a caretaker named Rosa, and the plumbing shutoff is labeled. The bank at Bay Shore has their letters on file with counsel, and nothing moves unless Harold sees it. Dr. Singh handed him a page and asked him to copy a sentence in his hand. Marcus wrote slowly, block letters like the kind he'd taught himself to use when he did Evelyn's labels for holiday boxes, and placed the pen down when he was done. The doctor asked him to subtract by 7s, and Marcus did, not to show off, to show he still counted the way a man should when people start acting like he is math they can solve. Then the doctor asked him to recall 3 words he had said at the start: apple, train, blue. And Marcus repeated them and added, and rosemary, not because you said it, because it's on my table most days. And Dr. Singh smiled once without wasting time on it. At the end, the doctor said, I will write a 1-page capacity letter now, and left the room. When he returned, he had the letter on his tablet, and a small printer slid it onto the tray with the neat sound that makes paper feel like permission. The letter said that Marcus Hart understood his property, his accounts, his risks, his plans, and could make and communicate decisions. We keep it simple, Dr. Singh said, and Marcus nodded because simple is stronger than dramatic. He thanked the doctor, paid the copay, and walked to the UPS counter 2 doors down where the notary from Monday happened to be working. She stamped a copy, fed 2 certified envelopes across the counter, and slid back the green slips. Marcus addressed one to Harold and one to the opposing counsel on the intent letter that had tried to sound like a petition. At 11:06, his phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Good. Send PDF as well. And Marcus stepped to the copy machine, scanned the page to his email, then from home would forward the file with a subject line so dull it would not invite any new nonsense. On the way back, he stopped at the pharmacy kiosk and printed 2 small photos Lily had texted Beth Sunday evening, one where her smile touched her eyes. He chose the one where the light sat right, trimmed it with the little blade, and slid it into a paper sleeve like it mattered, because it did. At 11:41, turning onto his block, he saw Joyce on her porch with her phone in her hand, her other hand pointing at a tan sedan idling across from his house. Officer Miller's car sat half a house down, his hat visible through the windshield. The sedan pulled away slow when Marcus turned in, and he wrote its plate on the yellow pad before he put the key back in his pocket. Inside, he set the folder on the table, took a photo of the capacity letter for his own file, sent the PDF to Harold with the subject "Capacity Letter," filed, then laid the printed locket photo on a paper towel and pressed the tiny silver hinge open with his thumbnail. The photo fit just. He closed the locket and held it to the light the way you hold a new thing to make sure it knows you. At 12:22, the doorbell rang. 2 quick taps, and Marcus checked the peephole. A man in a windbreaker with a square sticker badge that said Home Eval stood there with a clipboard, eyes already looking past the chain. Marcus left the chain in place and held up through the gap the single-page reply Harold had written in big type. No inspections, no evaluations, all communications in writing to counsel, and said, "You can take a photo of this, then you can leave." And the man took the photo, turned without the pronouncement he had brought with him, and got into a different tan sedan, this one with a magnet on the door that tried too hard to look official. Marcus wrote the plate, logged the time, 12:24, then called the non-emergency line and said, "It's logged." And the dispatcher said, "It's logged." And he put a small check in a small box, because the line between peace and noise is often ink. He ate a sandwich at the sink, stood while he chewed, and texted Beth a photo of the locket with the new picture inside. She wrote, "She's going to cry in a good way," and he typed, "Tell her the hinge still works," and left it. At 1:15, Harold called and said, "Letter received. I've forwarded to their counsel and the court clerk. If they file, we will answer with this and the porch sign photo. If they don't file, we keep living our lives." And Marcus said, "Pie Sunday." And Harold laughed once and said, "Pie Sunday," and hung up. At 1:37 then, Rodriguez sent a single thumbs up and a 4th photo from Monday he'd forgotten to attach. Derek's signature wide and uneven. Marcus saved it and wrote one line, "Returns complete, signature captured," and put one more box in the neat row of done. The afternoon softened. Joyce brought over a jar with basil, starts proper, said, "I told the officer I make loud tea at noon this week." And Marcus said, "Good." And he gave her a stamp for the letter she always forgot to mail. At 3:05, a plain envelope without a stamp sat under his mat again, Derek's fast hand on the front. "Call me." And Marcus slid it into a sleeve, photographed it, and texted Harold. 3:05 unstamped, then did not open it because he did not need more words when the plan already had enough. At 3:30, he drove to the little print shop and made 2 copies of the Garden Covenant page. Harold had sent him, the one that mentioned rosemary and the lemon tree without naming anything else. And he slid one copy behind the family photo on the hall table, like a backbone where it could not get hurt. Before dark, he took the small locket, set it on the dresser where the light could find it, then put the driver Lily liked on the hall hook so tomorrow it would not need hunting. He called Rosa at 4:10 and told her he would likely be down Friday, that the plumber should go ahead if the drip woke back up, that he'd bring her bread, and she said, "The sea is quiet this week." And he said, "Good," and they let the quiet carry the rest. At 4:40, Beth texted a single sentence. He said, "This isn't over again," and Marcus wrote back, "It is over for today." and forwarded the screenshot to Harold because procedure is how you make nonsense take a number. He made a simple supper, eggs again and toast, a thin slice of Sunday's pie, washed the plate, dried it, returned it to its spot, and wrote 3 lines on the pad for Thursday. Bank call, recorder shows file. Post office, checkbox. Rosa, confirm Friday. Small boxes beside each. Before bed, he took the pad to the nightstand and set the pencil across it, put the manila folder by the door, and pressed the side door with his hip to feel the lock answer. When he lay down, he did not replay the tests, the letters, the men with clipboards. He thought instead of Lily checking a tiny hinge and the way a photo can sit in silver and make a room tell the truth. And he slept. Not because anyone had surrendered, but because the day had put its weight in the right places, and the next one already had its boxes. Thursday came in gray and tidy, the kind of Pennsylvania morning that makes you notice the sound of your own house. And Marcus did what he always did to make the day sit still. Coffee on, window cracked an inch, deadbolt turned and felt, a lemon rolled under his palm until the scent rose. Then he pulled the yellow pad close and read the 3 lines he'd written the night before, with small boxes beside them. Bank, confirm recorder file. Post office, check box. Rosa, confirm Friday. He added one more. Print photo for Lily's locket. And drew a box because boxes keep hours honest. At 8:10, he called the county recorder. A clerk named Dana answered and spoke like a person who liked neat shelves. She read him 2 instrument numbers and said the addendum to the Juniper Street Trust was indexed as of last night, and the garden covenant showed under the corrected title, Evelyn Hart Garden, not the draft name they had used once. And he wrote the numbers in steady block letters and drew a check in the first box. At 8:34, he dialed Bayshore Savings from the landline so Static could not pretend to be part of the talk. Denise said their file now reflected the trust addendum and all future communications in writing to counsel. And he wrote, Bayshore noted, 8:36, and made a neat check because times make a day behave. By 9, he was at the post office with his scarf tucked down into his coat. The lobby smelled like tape and dust and decisions. His box held a flat envelope from Harold's office with certified copies for his own file, a green postcard from the recorder stamped recorded, and a thinner white envelope from Cape Shore Title in New Jersey. He did not open it there. He slid everything into the canvas bag and wrote, Box 908, on the pad right there on the counter, because writing it where you do it pins the thing down. At home, he set the envelopes on the table, checked the side door by pushing with his hip the way Rosa always told him to do at the beach house, and then opened Cape Shore Title's letter. Inside was a 1-page confirmation that the survivorship affidavit on the Cape May cottage had been indexed last month, and a note that their file was ready should he want to title the cottage to the trust. He put it back in its sleeve, took a photo for Harold, and wrote one clean line, Cape House paper. Ready, because he liked the quiet in that sentence. At 9:47, a van rolled slow in front of his house. Tan, the kind of tan people choose when they want to be ignored. It idled, moved on, circled the block. Marcus stood behind the curtain without hiding, wrote the plate on the pad, and made tea, because loud tea is what Joyce calls it when the kettle goes all the way to boil. 2 minutes later, there was a knock. 3 quick taps. And when he looked through the peephole, a man in a windbreaker with a square pre-inspection sticker on a clipboard stood there like speed was permission. Marcus left the chain set, slid Harold's 1-page reply through the gap, and said, No inspections, all communications to counsel. Then waited. The man tried the sentence people try when they think a house is a weak thing. We can do this the easy way. And Marcus said, We are. And closed the door soft, so the chain made the small click that sounds like a decision. He logged the time, 10:02, and called Officer Miller on the non-emergency line, read the plate, and listened to the scratch of a pen on the other end. We'll swing by at lunch, the officer said, and Marcus wrote, logged, and drew a small box and filled it in, because small boxes tame big nonsense. At 10:30, Beth called from her car, the blinker clicking under her words. He's quiet, she said, not saying Derek's name, but not calm. He's signed for the boxes. The golf bag is back where it belongs, leaning like it wants to apologize. And she paused, then added, I'm practicing. And Marcus said, "So am I." And they let the call end before either said sorry for things they could not fix for the other. He printed the small photo of Lily, the one he'd chosen yesterday, where the light sat right on her face, trimmed it at the kitchen table with the little blade, and pressed it into the tiny oval of Evelyn's locket. The hinge still worked. He clicked it, held it to the light, and set it on the dresser where the room could learn it. Near noon, he opened the canvas bag again and sorted the papers the way Evelyn had taught him years ago. Pile for keep, pile for send, pile for Harold has. Then made a thin folder marked Dr. Singh, even though that box was already checked, because keeping copies is not superstition, it is a habit. He slid the capacity letter inside and put the folder in the drawer that did not stick. At 12:18, the doorbell rang. 2 quick taps, and when he checked the peephole, he saw a different man with a clipboard and a square badge that said Home Eval. Marcus did the same thing he had done at 10, slid the page through the gap, did not invent new words. Watched the man take a photo of the sign in the glass and leave. He wrote the time, logged it, and made a sandwich at the sink, because chairs can be too much when a day still has edges. At 1:05, Harold called with a voice that did not waste volume. "Clerk has your capacity letter. If they file, we answer. If they don't, we ignore their drum." And Marcus said, "Recorder confirmed the garden covenant under the right name." And Harold said, "Good, I'll send you the stamped page for your frame." And Marcus smiled at the thought of a page you hang to make a room remember. At 1:40, he called Rosa. Her phone picked up on the first ring like it always did. "Friday?" she asked. And he said, "Friday." And she said, "The back door still needs a small hip." And he said, "I know." And she said, "The sea is quiet. The laundry window drip stopped by itself, but I'll stand near it when it rains." And he said, "Buy bread at Alvarez. I'll bring the pie." And she laughed the small laugh that makes work seem lighter. When he hung up, he added a line on tomorrow's page. "Bread, Alvarez, Rosa pie." And drew 2 boxes he knew he would be glad to check with his thumb. In the mid-afternoon, he called Bayshore's CD desk and asked, not urgent, not casual, about the ladder Evelyn had started when she knew time was short. The woman on the line said the next note had matured last week, and with accrued interest and the old savings bonds that had been swept in, the total now sat just under $480,000. She asked if he wanted instructions on file, and he said yes, roll to the trust, 4 rungs, 12 months apart, no one touches without counsel. And she said, "I'll note it and send confirmation." And he wrote CDs, $480 trust ladder, and did not draw a box because money is not a box. It is a tool. He looked at the phone a moment and felt nothing dramatic, only the quiet relief of a lever you can still lift. At 3:22, he walked next door with an envelope and 2 keys. Joyce answered in her house sweater, and he handed her the envelope labeled Joyce, Mail and Basil, and said, "I'll be down the shore a few days. Water the plant if it sulks. Call Miller if any vans decide they live here." And she said, "I make loud tea at noon," and tucked the keys into a jar by the door the way people do when they know where things should go. When he came back, a plain white envelope without a stamp sat under his mat again, with Derek's quick hand on the front. "Call me." And he slid it into a plastic sleeve without opening it, took a photo with the time in the corner, and texted it to Harold with 3:31 unstamped. Then put the sleeve in the drawer that did not stick and closed the drawer because some drawers should stay closed. He packed a small bag, 2 shirts that did not try to be younger than he was, the shaving kit that still smelled faintly of the sandalwood Evelyn liked, 1 good sweater for the wind off the water, and set it by the door. He put the locket in his pocket, not because he feared to leave it, because it seemed right to teach it a road. He checked the side door once more with his hip and listened to the lock answer. Set 2 timers on lamps because light helps a house stay brave, and wrote 3 small lines for Friday. Leave 9, bread, Alvarez, Rosa, stop at Fishman, and made 3 neat boxes. He did not think about arguments that might still want to happen. He thought about hinges and rosemary and lemon, and the way a plan feels when it matches a room. When the light went thin and the furnace clicked like it knew its job, he turned his phone to Do Not Disturb, except for Harold and Beth. Placed the yellow pad on the nightstand with the pencil laid across it. and slept like a man who had put weight in the right places and was ready to drive towards salt air in the morning. Friday started the way Marcus liked beginnings to feel. Quiet, simple, steady. Coffee on, window cracked an inch, the deadbolt turned and felt. A lemon rolled under his palm until the clean scent rose and said the day had shape. He read his yellow pad once more. 3 boxes. Leave. Leave 9. Bread, Alvarez Rosa. Stop at Fishman. And added a 4th. Change front lock, because a plan should match the ground under your feet. He set an envelope labeled Joyce, Mail and Basil on her porch with the spare key and a note that said, "Back Tuesday. Loud tea if the vans come," and pressed the side door with his hip to hear it answer before he locked it. At 8:57, he carried the small bag he had packed, 2 shirts that did not try to be younger than he was, the sandalwood shaving kit Evelyn used to laugh about, a good sweater for wind off water, and set it on the passenger seat beside the folder with the Cape Shore title letter and a fresh copy of the caretaker authorization naming Rosa. The road south took him past the Brown River and fields pulled tight for winter, and he drove without the radio, letting the steady tire hum be the only noise he needed. At 10:36, he pulled into a narrow street where Alvarez Bakery lived behind a bright blue door that always looked like it had just been painted. Inside smelled like warm bread and soap and something sweet he could not name, and the woman behind the counter nodded as if he had simply stepped out and come back. "Round?" she asked, and he said, "Round, please, and 2 small." And she bagged a round loaf and 2 rolls and put a slip of paper in with the total, and he paid cash because bread deserves the simplest kind of transaction. By 11:15, he turned down the lane to the cottage. The white clapboard and the small blue shutters Rosa kept touched up each spring sat easy in the gray light. And he parked in the driveway where the shells made a sound like quiet rain under the tires. The front door still needed a hip, and he gave it the small push, and the latch answered like a remembered joke. Rosa met him in the entry, hair tucked back, a sweater the color of the sea on a calm day, and hugged him without asking permission, the way people do who earned that right years ago. "You came," she said. "Friday," he said. They moved without wasting words. She set the bread on the counter. He opened the windows one by one to let the salt air teach the rooms how to breathe again, and she took out the small binder from the drawer that didn't stick, the one with tabs for plumbers, electricians, roofers, and the page at the front where she'd taped a copy of the caretaker letter he had sent. She slid the new copy under the clip and wrote today's date at the bottom, because paper is more reliable when it remembers its days. They walked the house in the slow way that finds what needs attention without inventing problems. Bathroom window quiet, laundry window dry for now, back door still asking for a hip, a soft drip mark under the kitchen sink that had stayed a mark and not become a leak. He wrote down meter numbers in his neat block print in the small notebook Evelyn had begun, and he had continued. And he put the notebook back in the drawer with the stamp and the paper clips and the pencil that still had teeth marks from a year when worry liked to chew. At noon, he unscrewed the 2 long screws on the front deadbolt and slid the cylinder out, replaced it with a new one from the hardware bag he had packed on purpose, turned the key once, twice, until the memory of old tumblers had been replaced by the quiet of new ones. He wrote the new key code on a small card and put it in the tin where spare keys lived. Then took the fake rock from beside the step and put it inside the tin too, because fake rocks do more harm than good. At 12:20, he and Rosa drove 3 blocks to the Fishman, the little stand beside the market with a chalkboard that said flounder, scallops, blue. And he bought flounder because it knows how to behave in a pan. Back at the cottage, he set the fish in the refrigerator and folded the Alvarez bag neatly because good bags get second lives, and his phone buzzed with a text from Beth, "Call when settled." And another from Derek, just 3 words that thought they were heavy. "I'm driving down." And he took a screenshot, wrote 12:42, text Derek, driving on his pad, forwarded it to Harold with no adjectives, and did not reply to Derek. At 1:10, he stepped outside to check the small side gate and saw a tan van slide slow past the house, the kind of slow that pretends it is accidental. He wrote the plate number on the pad, went back inside, and told Rosa, who nodded once and said, Tony across the street saw it. He has a chair that faces noon, which was her way of saying he watches without making a fuss. They ate a piece of bread with cheese at the kitchen counter because eating is how you say to a house, "We are here now." And then he called Harold to say he had arrived. The locks had been changed. The caretaker letter was on the hook. The Cape Shore title page was in his folder. Harold said, "Good. Enjoy the quiet. If anyone knocks, use the same sentence." And Marcus said, "I know the sentence," and hung up. At 2:05, the van returned and idled at the curb, and a man in a windbreaker stepped out holding a clipboard, and behind him, Derek, hands jammed into his coat pockets like he was trying to push back a season. Rosa stood beside Marcus at the door. Marcus left the chain set and opened the door the width of courtesy. "We're here to do a quick walkthrough," the man said, flashing a square sticker badge that said only, "Eval." And he tried to look past Marcus, like past was his right. Marcus slid the one-page reply through the gap, the same big type he had used at home. No inspections, no evaluations, all communications in writing to counsel, and said in the even tone he saved for times like this, "No," then stood still. Derek stepped forward before the man could reload his sentence, his mouth working to shape a softer argument. "Mom would have wanted the family to enjoy this place," he said, as if the word family were a universal key. "Your mother wanted it cared for," Marcus said, "not carved up." And he held up the new caretaker letter with Rosa's name printed clear at the bottom, the Cape Shore title note clipped behind it like a quiet spine. "Any visit here is by invitation," he added, "and today you do not have one. Council's address is on the page." And he let the silence after that carry the rest because silence often says the part people hear. The man with the clipboard looked at Derek, and Derek's jaw did the old thing it did when no had not been rehearsed. "We have a key," the man tried, and Marcus said, "You had a key," and closed the door soft so the chain made the small click that felt like a period. Rosa, who did not do theater, said in her plain way, "I'll call Tony." And Tony's slow walk across the street was the kind of presence that persuades men with clipboards to leave. By 2:15, the van pulled away, and Marcus wrote the time down because logs tame tempers. He called the township non-emergency number. Rosa kept on the fridge and said, "Just logging a visit." And the woman said, "Logged." And that was that. At 3, he and Rosa put flounder in a pan with a little oil and a dusting of salt, warmed the Alvarez bread, and ate standing because plates taste better when a room is still learning them. His phone buzzed again at 3:22 with a single text from Derek. "This isn't over." The same shape he'd sent before, and Marcus screenshotted it, forwarded it to Harold, and typed one line back to Beth. "We're fine. C is quiet." And then put his phone face down on the shelf where Evelyn used to keep the matches. The rest of the afternoon was the work he likes best, which is work that asks for no audience. He checked the furnace filter, oiled the sticky hinge on the back porch door, wrote down the number on the propane tank, replaced 2 porch bulbs, and put the new lock's spare key in an envelope labeled Rosa, front, and handed it to her with bread for her kitchen. As evening came in with that soft gray Cape light, he set the tiny locket on the bedroom dresser where the outside could find it, then stood at the window and let the small sounds collect. The faint lift of gulls, tires on shells, the rhythm of a house that has learned to wait. He sat at the table with the yellow pad and made tomorrow's 3 boxes. Notary, corner store, 11. Walk the beach to jetty, check sand under steps, call Beth Sunday pie plan, and felt the quiet kind of relief that comes when a plan is not a speech but a sequence. He washed the 1 pan and 2 plates, dried them, put them where they belonged, checked the new lock by turning the key once and feeling it answer, and went to bed in a room that did not ask him to explain anything. Sleep came easy, not because the argument had died, but because the weight of the day had been put in the right places, and tomorrow would open with boxes already drawn. A door that answered to him, and the sea reminding him what kept moving without needing to be told. Saturday learned the house fast, the way good places do. Marcus woke to the soft hiss of the ocean behind the windows, set coffee on, cracked the kitchen casement to let the salt in, turned and felt the new deadbolt answer, then rolled a lemon under his palm because even here, that small act made the morning sit still. On the yellow pad by the sink, he read the 3 boxes he'd drawn the night before. Notary, corner store, 11. Walk beach to jetty, check sand under steps. Call Beth, Sunday pie plan. And added one more, post porch notice, because paper on glass is sometimes the simplest fence. By 8, he had the front room windows open a hand's width and the caretaker binder on the table, yesterday's entry dated neat. Locks changed, keys issued, Rosa copy filed. And he wrote, Saturday, no leaks, furnace filter changed, propane 42%. Then put the pencil back in the ring so it would be there when the next person reached for it. At 8:40, he walked the side of the cottage where the steps met the sand and crouched to look at the bottom riser. No new bite from the last storm. The post's still true. But he made a note to bring 2 bags of gravel next trip because prevention weighs less than repair. A gull scolded something he couldn't see and then lost interest, which he took as a good sign. At 9:10, he set the small locket on the dresser and watched the light catch the tiny hinge and felt that steady, quiet lift that comes when a thing is in the right place. Then he put on his coat, left by the front, locked the new lock, and gave it the small tug that tells the hand the work is done, and walked 3 blocks to the corner store where the notary keeps her stamp next to a jar of pens and a dish of peppermints. At 10:59, he slid across the counter 2 single-page forms Harold had emailed last night. One, no agency, no entry notice with the cottage address and the sentence that all communications go to council. One caretaker authorization duplicate with Rosa's name where anyone with a clipboard could read it. And the notary watched him sign, pressed the stamp firm enough to make the paper feel the mark, and dated the bottom. "You want copies?" she asked. "Always," he said, and took the warm papers back down the block like a man carrying bread. At the cottage, he taped the no agency, no entry notice to the inside of the glass beside the latch where a camera could see it, and a knock could not pretend it hadn't. And he clipped the fresh caretaker page to the binder's first tab, so anyone claiming to be confused would have to work at it. He drew a neat check in the notary box and in post porch notice. Then ate a piece of yesterday's Alvarez round with cheese over the sink, because it is good to eat when a house is watching. At noon, he walked to the jetty, shoes sinking a little where last tide had pushed the line higher, and stopped to look back at the row of small roofs. His was 3rd from the corner. White clapboard, blue shutters. Rosa touched every spring, the sort of place that looks like it belongs to whoever will do the work. He checked the steps again on his way in, ran a hand along the rail to feel if the screws had remembered their job, then wrote, "Steps good, add gravel next time," on the pad. At 12:47, his phone buzzed. A single text from Derek. "You can't hide down there." And Marcus did that same quiet thing he'd trained himself to do for a week now. Screenshot, write the time on the pad, forward to Harold without adjectives, then put the phone face down. At 1:05, Harold called first. "Their counsel just emailed me," he said, voice low and even. "They have advised their client to cease direct contact and will route any future communication through our office. No petition filed today. If they file Monday, we answer with Wednesday's letter and your porch notice. If they don't, we go back to living our lives." And Marcus said, "Good," and wrote, "Counsel to counsel only," with a small check because boxes make people behave. At 1:30, he called Beth. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been holding the phone the way you hold worry. "Pie Sunday," he said, keeping the words short enough not to trip on other things. 2:00, she said, and then softer. "I told him we're coming without him. He can come when he can talk about people instead of square footage. I'm practicing." And he said, "I heard," and they ended the call before apology or anger could find their way back into it. He wrote, "Pie, Sun, 2, and drew a square that already felt checked. Mid-afternoon, he went to the small hardware store on Ocean and bought 2 laminated private property by invitation only signs and 4 stainless screws because paper fades and lamination makes time wait. Back at the cottage, he put 1 sign on the side gate and 1 on the back porch rail, straight and level, then swept 2 shells off the back step and pocketed 1 because Lily likes to carry small truths. At 3:40, Rosa stopped by with a pie in a tin and 3 words, "You eat, yes?" And they ate slices at the counter while the house learned their forks. Tony says the van drove by once, she said. I know, he said. We have a binder, she added, and they both let that be the end of it. At 5, he set the caretaker binder back in the drawer that didn't stick, put the spare key in the tin with a slip that had today's date, then packed the small bag, 2 shirts, good sweater, shaving kit, and laid the Cape Shore title letter on top because he likes to see the thing that kept a day honest. Before dark, he walked the lane one more time, nodded to Tony, who nodded back from his chair that faces noon, and stood a minute with his hand on the gate he had just signed, feeling the way metal holds a decision. Sleep took him quick and straight, not because the week was finished, but because the weight of it was in the right places. Sunday, he was on the road by 9, with the pie tin washed and the binder entries done, the cottage locked and answering, the no agency notice sitting where it would catch morning light. The drive north was quiet, bare trees showing more field than leaves. And at noon, he set his bag in his own hallway in Pennsylvania, pressed the side door with his hip, and liked the way it spoke back. At 1:30, he set 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 napkins, and the green mug on the kitchen table, rolled a lemon under his palm and cut it because the scent does something to a room that paper can't. And when the tires sounded on his gravel at 1:58, he opened the door before Beth could knock. She stood there with Lily half a step behind her, and Derek's truck not in sight. "Hi, Dad," Beth said, and there was no performance in it. "Hi, Grandpa," Lily said, and then she was past him and in his arms. They sat, and they ate pie without pretending it could still be warm. And after the second bite, Lily reached into her coat and took out the locket and held it like a question. "It fits," he said, and she nodded and closed her fingers around it, and breathed once the way people do when a room gives them back something they weren't sure they'd kept. Beth glanced at the yellow pad by his elbow, saw the boxes. Pie, son, 2, checked, and smiled in a way that did not ask for permission. "I'm sorry for the things that used your name to carry someone else's hurry," she said, and he nodded because sorry is better when it does not ask to be softened. "3 things," he said, and he didn't look for paper to make it formal. "We don't talk about selling. We talk about people. I help Lily directly. If anyone wants to help me, they can ask me on a Sunday after church and bring pie." And Beth said, "Yes." And Lily laughed, small and bright, and said, "I like rules that taste like lemon." And the 3 of them sat there a minute, letting the house learn this new sound. When they left, Lily hugged him tight and whispered, "Keep a chair for me." And he said, "Always." And after the door closed and the gravel quieted, he washed the 2 plates, dried them, put them back where they belong, and took the yellow pad to the table and wrote Monday's first box in block letters that did not shake, "Live in my house." And beside it drew the neatest check he'd made all week, because some boxes can be marked before the day even starts.